Hey guys, tonight we're trudging into a place where history gets wonderfully soggy. You find yourself ankle-deep in the marshy floodplains of ancient Mesopotamia, the so-called cradle of civilization. Though to be honest, it feels more like the cradle of constant dampness. The air is warm and still, dragonflies hover lazily over reeds, and the ground beneath your feet squishes in that oddly satisfying way, like stepping into a bowl of yesterday's oatmeal. Here, around 5,000 years ago, some of the first true cities began to rise, not with majestic stone or dazzling marble, but with mud. Glorious, wet, cling to your sandals mud. It's everywhere, in the streets, in your fingernails, probably in your breakfast. The early Sumerians didn't have much in the way of forests, stones, or mountains, but what they did have in endless supply was good, sticky alluvial clay. And so they used it, obsessively, religiously, absurdly that you're walking through the bustling edge of a town called Eridu, maybe one of the oldest cities on Earth. Kids are splashing around in an irrigation canal. Someone's herding goats with a lot of yelling and zero success, and two very tired workers are knee-deep in a puddle, shaping thick, gray mud into rough blocks. This is where our long, sleepy journey begins, with the humble mud brick.so. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to hear where you're watching from and what time it is. Drop your city and local hour in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lift one of the bricks. It's surprisingly heavy, cool to the touch, with bits of straw poking out at odd angles. A slight squish at the corner tells you it hasn't fully dried. That's fine. No one's in a rush here. Bricks like this are molded by hand, shaped in wooden frames, then left to harden under the sun like a sleepy lizard basking all afternoon. You watch a man smear the inside of a mold with water, plop in a gob of mud, and pat it flat with the same rhythm you'd use to fluff a pillow. Over and over. It's monotonous in the most relaxing way. There's a kind of meditative silence to it, broken only by the distant bleat of sheep and the slap of wet clay. This material, so basic, so abundant, was the beating heart of Mesopotamian life. It built the homes, the schools, the temples, and even the beer taverns. Yes, they had those too. But don't let the simplicity fool you. This wasn't just some crude blob people threw together. Mud brick construction was an entire science, passed down through generations. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian brickmakers had some kind of informal guild structure or whether it was more of a free-for-all. Some say skilled laborers had near-sacred status. Others suggest they were just guys who didn't run away fast enough when the city needed walls. Either way, you notice something peculiar. Nobody seems to hate this process. Maybe it's the soothing repetition. Maybe it's because bricks meant safety, shelter, and warmth. Until the next flood. Anyway, speaking of floods, the Euphrates and Tigris rivers are both gleaming in the distance. Beautiful, right? Also catastrophically unpredictable. Every year, they overflow, smearing everything in their path into a muddy mess. Yet without that annual flooding, there would be no fertile soil, no farming, and no clay. The irony doesn't escape you. The early Mesopotamians built with mud because they had to. They worshipped gods made from clay, wrote on tablets made from clay, and built temples entirely from clay. This wasn't just a convenience, it was a worldview. You came from mud, you lived in mud, and one day, you return to it. There's even a creation myth in Sumerian lore where the gods shape humans out of dirt and divine spit. It's charming, in a swampy, mildly disgusting kind of way. One scholar described it as the most practical theology imaginable, which is a polite way of saying everyone here was very, very muddy. Over near the city gate, someone's piling bricks into a wheelbarrow that looks like it was designed by someone who had only ever seen a wheel described verbally. You step aside as it creaks past. No rush. Everything here moves at a syrupy, sun-baked pace. The lizard skitters over a pile of bricks stacked under a reed canopy. They're drying slowly, darkening from gray to a mellow tan. The air smells like wet dust and barley mash. Somewhere nearby, someone's baking bread on a flat stone. The scent floats lazily over the yard, making you briefly question whether ancient history should taste this good. You turn back toward the rows of half-finished bricks. Each one is a small promise. A wall, a home, maybe even a palace. But you also notice something else. These bricks are fragile. Without constant maintenance, they dissolve. Every few years, walls need relayering. Roofs sag. Temples slump. You can almost hear the slow, sleepy crumble of entropy at work. And yet, cities like Eridu, Uruk, and Uar rose again and again. Rebuilt not in spite of the mud, but because of it. The earth itself provided the material, and the people responded by building, crumbling, and building again. Not exactly the kind of efficiency you'd see in a Roman aqueduct, but it worked. Somehow, for thousands of years, you sit down on a warm brick, feeling the faint vibrations of footsteps echo through the ground. A donkey trots past, uninterested. You stare at the horizon where ziggurats once rose like stepped clouds of sun-baked dirt, catching the last rays of evening light. The mud sticks to your hands. You don't wipe it off. You wake up, figuratively, of course, just in time to witness the ancient ballet of brick-making enter full swing. The sun climbs lazily above the reed roofs of early Mesopotamian homes, casting long, syrupy shadows across the open yards where workers are already knee-deep in puddles of clay and effort. You're not just watching this time. You're going to feel it. First, your feet sink into the mixing pit. It's like warm pudding, gritty and oddly therapeutic. A man hands you a shovel with one end worn smooth from decades of use. And he grins in that universal way that says, "We're going to be here a while." You glance around and notice that no one is rushing. Because this isn't just work, it's rhythm. You slap the clay. You squish it. You stomp it in with your bare heels. This isn't architecture. It's a massage for your feet, a workout for your shoulders, and a lesson in patience for your modern soul. The ingredients are deceptively simple: river mud, straw, water, and sunshine. But like a really stubborn pancake recipe, it takes the right touch to make it all hold together. One of the older workers mumbles something that roughly translates to, "Too wet and it slumps, too dry and it crumbles." You nod, pretending you already knew that. He's mixing with a kind of calm, deliberate tempo that only comes from doing this for about 40 years longer than you've been alive. The straw's important. Maybe more than you realize. It binds the clay, prevents cracking, and gives the bricks a kind of primitive rebar structure. Ancient engineers were no fools. They figured out early on that dry grass held things together better than any government policy. Historians still argue whether brickmaking was entirely manual or if they had some rudimentary tools to help. Some inscriptions hint at brick molds being passed down as family heirlooms. Others suggest communal tools shared between work gangs. Either way, there's no record of anyone inventing a decent chair because everyone's just squatting in the mud. You glance toward the edge of the yard, where two teenage boys are carrying finished bricks to a long, flat platform. It's a sun-drying station, which sounds fancy until you realize it's just the dirt ground made slightly flatter. They lay out the bricks like sleeping cats. dozens of them, side by side, arranged for optimal sunlight and minimal foot traffic. Occasionally, a curious goat walks across the whole setup and ruins an entire batch. No one even yells. That's just life here. Muddy, messy, mildly infuriating, but never rushed. You begin to see how this repetitive, tactile process shaped the very psychology of ancient life. There's comfort in it. You're not dreaming of skyscrapers or revolutions. You're thinking about whether the sun will stay out long enough to dry this latest row before the next storm. There's something deeply human in that, and while it may all seem monotonous, scoop, slap, shape, stack, it's also deeply personal. Many brick makers added little markings to their bricks, a thumbprint, a symbol, sometimes even a short inscription like "Made by Arad, son of Taidu." Not for glory, just for recognition. Hey, I was here. I made this wall. You try it yourself. Press your index finger gently into the corner of a brick. It leaves a neat dimple, like a miniature crater on a soft, squishy moon. Then comes the stacking. Once dry, the bricks are moved to construction zones with all the elegance of a game of poorly organized Tetris. Workers call to each other, pass bricks hand to hand, and lay them in a neat, offset pattern that will eventually form walls, arches, courtyards, and rooftops. There's no cement, just a kind of muddy paste made from, you guessed it, more clay. Even at this stage, the rhythm continues. There's a soft slap every time a brick is pressed into place. Slap, shift, slap, shift. It's not unlike the sound of waves. If waves were brown and full of straw, you step back and admire the structure rising from the mud. It's simple, rectangular, maybe 2 stories tall. A home, a school, a grain storage facility. From a distance, it looks like a giant, slightly wonky birthday cake that someone forgot to frost. But up close, it's a marvel of efficiency, lightweight, breathable, easy to repair, and cheap. So cheap, in fact, you're reminded that bricks weren't just materials. In some cities, they were currency. Workers were sometimes paid in bricks. Not gold, not silver, literal lumps of dirt, which might sound ridiculous until you consider that those bricks could then be used to build your own home, or traded, or even stored as rainy season insurance. Yes, the Mesopotamian equivalent of a savings account was a stack of dried rectangles behind your goat pen. And let's not forget the role of children in all of this. Schools, called the dubbas, were often made of the very same bricks kids helped mix as punishment for not reciting their Sumerian verbs correctly. There's a bit of poetic justice there. You sit down on a low wall and stretch your arms, caked in mud and speckled with straw. Around you, the day slows. The air thickens with late afternoon heat. A distant ox bell jingles. The scent of firewood and lentil stew drifts from an unseen kitchen that it's hard not to admire this world in all its muddy simplicity. No internet, no electric bills, no emails asking if you've circled back on that task. Just mud, straw, sun, and human determination. Layered one sleepy brick at a time, a small boy walks by, balancing 2 bricks on his head with the confidence of a tightrope artist. He doesn't even glance your way. He's probably done this 100 times. You wonder, briefly, if he's dreaming of being a priest or a merchant, or maybe just someone who doesn't have to carry bricks. Then again, maybe he's perfectly content. After all, in a world where everything melts with the rain, and rebuilding is as natural as sleeping, there's a certain peace in accepting the rhythm of the mud. You stretch your back, brushing off flecks of dried clay from your tunic. Well, the tunic you've imagined for this long, dusty stroll through time. And just as your muscles start to loosen, a sound reaches your ears, a faint splop, followed by a slow, resigned sigh. You follow the noise around the side of a house, and there it is. Yet another wall, collapsed into a sloppy, gooey mess. Welcome to the true nature of ancient architecture. It slumps. You crouch next to the rubble, poking gently at the corner of a half-melted wall. It gives way like a soggy cookie dipped too long in tea. The whole section has collapsed, not from enemy attack or divine wrath, but from yesterday's unexpected rainstorm. Because here in the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates, weather is less of a minor inconvenience and more of a structural threat. The early Mesopotamians understood this. And yet, they kept building with the same material over and over. Why? Well, for one, it was cheap. You could scoop your house out of the ground and rebuild it with nothing but time, a wooden frame, and a bit of elbow grease. Also, to be fair, there weren't many other options. Stone was rare and reserved for temples or royal projects. Wood? Even rarer. So if mud was all you had, you learned to live with the slump. Historians still argue whether this sogginess was tolerated or if it sparked minor architectural revolutions. Some records suggest people experimented with protective layers, plaster coatings, reed mats, even early forms of waterproofing. Others say the average homeowner simply shrugged and waited for the sun to harden things again, as if time itself was the repairman. You pass another building, a modest two-room home with walls leaning slightly like tired men resting on canes. The roof is made from interlaced reeds and coated with a thin smear of mud, now cracked in a spiderweb pattern from yesterday's heat. You duck inside. It's cool and dim. A small oil lamp flickers in the corner. A goat blinks at you from under a bench. As you settle onto a brick ledge, a piece of ceiling flakes off and lands gently on your shoulder. Nothing dramatic, just mud being mud. The house smells of smoke, earth, and lentils. Everything inside is made from some version of clay, jars, hearths, little stools. It's like living inside a very dry loaf of bread. And yet it works. It's quiet, peaceful. There's a comfort in the impermanence of it all. You realize that Mesopotamians didn't view their homes as permanent fortresses. They were shelters, yes, but also evolving structures, breathing things, sometimes slouching, sometimes crumbling, but always fixable. You step back outside and nearly trip over a young man perched on a ladder, patching up the outer wall with more mud. He looks at you, shrugs, and gestures as if to say, "It's just that time of year." You offer to help, and before long, your hands are in it again, slathering thick clay onto the side of the wall, smoothing it with wide strokes. There's a certain kind of therapy in it. Rebuilding isn't failure here. It's routine, expected, a little like shaving or cleaning the dishes, tedious, necessary, and oddly satisfying when you're finished. Across the way, you spot what might have once been a community hall. Now, it's mostly a pile of partially eroded brickwork. A few columns remain, bent and weathered like old knees. The corners are rounded not by tools, but by centuries of wind and rainfall. You run your fingers along the edge. It feels tired. And here's the thing, this wasn't rare. Entire neighborhoods slowly slumped, brick by brick, year after year. Urban decay wasn't some dramatic collapse. It was a soft, yawning slide. As walls bowed and roofs sagged, people either patched things up or built right on top of the wreckage. In fact, that's part of why Mesopotamian cities grew taller over time. Each time a building failed, a new layer was laid down over the remains. After generations, these cities became tells, massive mounds made entirely of compacted ruins. A kind of accidental layer cake of history. One where archaeologists now dig carefully, like peeling an onion made of dirt and old shopping lists. Speaking of which, you glance down at a broken brick and notice faint markings. It's part of an inscription, barely visible. Maybe a builder's name, or a date, or even a prayer. There's something humbling about seeing someone's words, meant to last forever, melting into obscurity under your fingertips. You look up at the skyline, if you can call it that. Mud rooftops, reed fences, distant smoke. No towering pyramids, no golden temples, just low, slumped silhouettes, shaped by the land and slowly returning to it. And yet, this was the beating heart of civilization. Writing was born here. Laws, bureaucracy, beer, all of it happened in houses made from the same stuff you'd find at the bottom of your shoe after a walk in the rain. A child giggles nearby, chasing a chicken through the remains of a toppled wall. An old man leans on a cane, watching him with a smile that says this has happened before and it will happen again. There's comfort in knowing that things fall apart and that people put them back together. Even the gods didn't escape the slump. You pass a small shrine, its walls bowed and patched, its roof half covered in reeds and prayers. Inside sits a weathered clay idol, slouching ever so slightly in its corner. But it's still there, still sacred, still muddy. And as the sun dips behind the low hills in the west, the entire town seems to glow, not with grandeur, not with power, but with a quiet resilience. These walls may slump, these bricks may crack, but the people, they stay, they rebuild, they sleep, dream, and wake up to slap more mud into the mold. You settle down on a warm step, feeling the heat of the day still radiating through the bricks. Above you, the sky deepens into velvet blue. A dog barks. A flute plays softly in the distance. And somewhere, you suspect, a wall is gently falling down. You're back on your feet, stretching muscles that didn't even exist in your modern life. Who knew historic time travel involved so much squatting? Ahead lies the city of Uruk, shimmering faintly under the morning haze. But this isn't just any ancient city. It's a masterpiece of repetition, a monument to the human instinct to build, watch it fall, and build again. And again, and again. You walk slowly down a narrow alley, walls towering on either side, their surfaces flaking like sunburnt skin. Every few steps, you pass another patch job, fresh clay slapped hastily over last month's erosion. A child runs by with a bundle of straw, giggling. A woman leans out of a window to shake a rug, and for a moment, you're caught in a dust storm of crumbs and goat hair. Welcome to the Great Rebuild cycle. Historians still argue whether the constant reconstruction of these cities was deliberate urban planning or just the inevitable result of stubborn people living in flood-prone real estate. Some believe Mesopotamians embraced the collapse-rebuild rhythm as a cultural norm, even a spiritual metaphor. Others argue it was more like ancient civic fatigue. Just keep piling new bricks on top until it looks vaguely house-shaped again. You step over a half-buried brick in the middle of the path and realize it's not a mistake. It's a layer, a fossilized footprint of someone's living room from 300 years ago. Because here in Mesopotamia, cities weren't demolished and rebuilt, they were buried and raised. Literally, you climb a small rise and realize it's not a hill. It's a tell, a mound created by thousands of years of construction stacked upon itself. Each layer a moment in time. The house you visited earlier? Maybe the 5th or 6th story up in this sedimentary sandwich. Somewhere below you are temples, shops, bedrooms, even entire city walls, flattened, crushed, and forgotten beneath newer versions. It's like walking through the world's messiest scrapbook, one made entirely of dirt and questionable roofing choices. You reach what was once the heart of Uruk, a place older than the wheel, older than writing, older than your sleep-deprived thoughts. The massive temple to Inanna once stood here, the goddess of love, war, and occasional city planning. It's long gone, of course, but pieces remain. A curve of foundation here, a block stamped with a king's name there, all layered over by centuries of upgrades and weather-induced failures. And that's when it hits you. These people never stopped building. Rain, war, rot, it didn't matter. They just built on top of the old. Some houses have foundations 3, 4 layers deep. Each rebuild lifted the city higher, farther above the floodwaters, until, ironically, the higher you built, the more likely your bricks would dry out too fast and crack. Modern archaeologists have an affectionate name for this phenomenon: the Mesopotamian layer cake. It's adorable until you realize it means digging through literal meters of mud brick, each layer whispering a slightly different dialect of history. You run your hand along a wall, and it gives just slightly, like bread crust left out too long. A man beside you is smoothing a new layer of plaster over a doorway, humming a tune you don't recognize. You ask how many times this house has been rebuilt. He shrugs and gestures vaguely downward. 5 times. 10. It depends on how you count the partial collapses, he says with a grin. There's a sense of comfort in that casual relationship with destruction. They don't fear collapse. It's expected. The real tragedy would be not having the materials or time to rebuild. That's why bricks are made constantly, even when no new building is underway. Stockpiles the city like small, rectangular hopes waiting for their turn. You pass a courtyard where a pile of fresh bricks sits in the shade. Each one bears a small triangular stamp, marking them as the property of a local noble, or perhaps just a particularly organized potter. You pick one up. It's warm from the sun, smooth along the edges, and you can see the imprint of the straw like veins and skin. Suddenly, a low rumble reaches your ears. Not thunder, just a wall somewhere behind you giving up. You turn, but no one else flinches. A few workers walk past carrying buckets. One of them mumbles, "Third time this month," with all the energy of someone noting the weather. You walk along a newly built street, the bricks still light in color, not yet darkened by soot, feet, or disappointment. To your left, a newer ziggurat rises, though new is relative. It's maybe 80 years old, but already its lower levels are starting to bulge outward like bread rising unevenly in an oven. At its base are the remnants of an older temple, partially swallowed by the new foundation. You can see where the layers diverge, different sizes of bricks, different mixtures of straw, even the faint change in clay color from generation to generation. And just to add another sprinkle of irony, they probably dismantled some of the older temple to make bricks for the newer one. Recycling, Mesopotamian style. Reduce, reuse, reconstruct. You pause near the gate of the temple. A large stone slab stands upright, a rarity in this city of mud. It's carved with a list of royal donations, bricks, laborers, cattle. One king boasts that he rebuilt the house of the gods from its fallen form. The next ruler brags that he added an extra wall. The third simply states, "I patched the roof." There's a strange humility in that progression. Sometimes greatness is in the grand design. Sometimes it's in fixing the leak above the altar, and you wonder, how many kings weren't remembered? How many layers of labor, sweat, and soggy sandals now lie beneath your feet? Unrecorded but no less vital, the sun begins to lower behind the dusty horizon. You sit on the edge of a worn brick step and watch as the city hums with soft energy. Chickens dart between piles of clay. A woman shouts playfully at a man balancing an entire doorframe on his back. A child squats beside a puddle and forms tiny bricks, just for fun. Evening cool creeps in, and the shadows stretch. Another day fades. Another wall sags. Another story settles quietly beneath the surface, waiting to be buried and built upon. The ziggurat looms behind you now as you wander deeper into the slumbering heart of the city, past the crooked alleys, reed-covered awnings, and the occasional mud-splattered goat who clearly owns this block. The air is thicker here, close to the water, and the scent of river silt mingles with smoke from evening fires. You can hear voices echoing between walls, muffled like secrets whispered into jars. You follow those echoes toward the high district where the sacred meets the squishy. This is where temples rise, or try to. And unlike most of the other buildings around here, these temples really matter. So of course, they're also made out of mud. You arrive at the base of a temple complex, a massive, sloping series of platforms stacked like a tiered cake that's been left out in the sun too long. The surface is mottled with streaks from years of storms, erosion, and last week's goat stampede. Bits of straw stick out of the bricks like ancient whiskers. Still, the structure holds. Sort of. These were the ziggurats, built with divine intention and architectural stubbornness. Sacred staircases led to godly apartments in the sky. That's right. These temples were believed to be literal homes for the gods. And what did they live in? Luxury stone mansions? Nope. Mud brick palaces with leaking roofs and sagging altars. Even the divine weren't spared from the squelch of Mesopotamian construction materials. You begin your slow ascent. Each step is a foot-wide rectangle of sun-hardened clay, slightly uneven, slightly crumbly. It's like walking up a loaf of badly sliced bread. As you reach the upper tiers, you spot men with baskets full of fresh plaster, carefully slathering over cracks that appeared sometime after breakfast. Divine dwellings, apparently, need near constant upkeep. One man waves at you and mutters something that sounds like, "Watch out for the soft spot." You pause. You realize half the top platform has been recently repaired, evident from the brighter color of the newer bricks. The rest looks, well, slightly concave. Still, the view is incredible. You look out across the city, flat rooftops, curling smoke, the meandering river beyond. The city is alive, breathing, deteriorating, rebuilding. Inside the temple, it's cool and shaded. The walls are smooth, freshly replastered with a thick, chalky mud that smells vaguely of pond water and incense. You pass a statue of Inanna, carved from alabaster and perched slightly off-kilter on her pedestal. She watches you with that eternally serene expression that only goddesses or cats can pull off. Her shrine is surrounded by votive offerings, small clay figurines, bits of jewelry, and bowls filled with grains. The priest here, barefoot and wide-eyed, nods as he adds another smear of mud to the base of the idol. Maintenance is prayer in this place. Clean the walls, bless the altar, patch the roof. Repeat. Historians still argue whether these temples were purely religious sites or if they doubled as administrative centers. Holy DMV offices, if you will. Some records suggest taxes were collected here, scribes were housed here, and politics oozed through these same muddy corridors. Others believe the temples were mostly ceremonial, with an occasional burst of paperwork. You sit near a corner and run your hand across the wall. It's soft to the touch, slightly cool. You realize, not for the first time, that even the most sacred structures here are vulnerable to time, weather, and poorly trained laborers. But maybe that was the point, because here's the kicker. These buildings weren't just for the gods, they were made with the gods in mind. Sumerian myths tell of divine beings molding the world from clay, shaping people from mud, and animating them with breath. So, in a weird, poetic way, building temples from the same squishy material was part of the cosmic order. You recall one myth in particular, the story of the god Enki creating humanity from clay and divine spit. Not the most glamorous beginning, but deeply consistent with the world around you. Everything in Mesopotamia returns to mud eventually. Even the gods, apparently, liked it that way. Outside, two boys chase a dog around the base of the temple, their feet kicking up little clouds of dust. You smile. The dog, for the record, is winning. As you make your way down the steps again, carefully avoiding the soft spot. You pass a set of large bricks near the temple gate. They're stamped with the name of the king who commissioned the structure, Naram-Sin. Each one boldly declares, "I built this for the gods. Please remember me." And here you are, millennia later, reading his plea in a half-erased stamp on a slightly moldy rectangle. You reach the ground just in time to see a group of temple workers rolling in another batch of clay. A few are laughing. One is humming. None seem particularly stressed. The building behind them is sacred, yes, but also temporary. Everything here is temporary. And somehow, that's okay. You head down a winding lane behind the temple district, stepping over piles of discarded straw and cracked bricks. Every so often, you catch a glimpse of someone tucking a small clay object into a niche in the wall, a votive, a token, a reminder. It's as if each person here has accepted that the world slumps, leaks, and crumbles, and instead of fighting it, they honor it. And in that acceptance, there's peace. The moon is rising, casting silver light across the wet clay paths. Somewhere, a reed flute plays again, this time slower, softer. A breeze carries the scent of baking bread and wet earth. You pause, close your eyes, and take it all in. You're standing in a city made of dust, rebuilt from dust, and proud of its dust. A sacred place that doesn't need to last forever. It only needs to be cared for, one gentle handful of mud at a time. The morning light creeps in again, dusting the streets in soft gold as you follow a narrow path toward the outskirts of the city. You're told this is where the laborers live, not the scribes, not the priests, and certainly not the kings. These are the homes of the people who shaped the very bones of Mesopotamian civilization, the bricklayers, and not the well-fed artisans who work on temples or palaces. No, these are the lowest of the low. The ones who stir the mud, haul the water, slap the bricks, and then do it all again the next day. You wander past a line of low huts, sagging at the corners like exhausted beasts. A few doors are open. Inside, families are already stirring, clay stoves glowing faintly, steam rising from pots of porridge made from barley and whatever else didn't mold overnight. Then you hear it. The call. Not dramatic, just a flat shout from a man in a frayed tunic. Work is starting. You trail behind a line of laborers marching toward the brickyards, their shoulders bowed not from the weight of their tools, but from the knowledge of what the day holds. The sun isn't high yet, but the heat is already starting to rise. It bakes into your scalp. Your feet crunch in the dry clay dust that covers everything here like talcum powder with ambition. You arrive at the yard and are handed a shovel. A woman points to a pit and motions for you to get in. You do, because no one argues with her. She's wearing a sash that marks her as an overseer, and she has the glare of someone who's been ignored one too many times. The pit is half full of yesterday's mixture. Straw has softened in the night air, and the mud has thickened into something that squelches around your ankles and threatens to keep your sandals as trophies. You begin stirring, and you stir and stir. The sun climbs. Your arms ache. Your neck itches. A fly lands on your lip. You consider surrendering to the mud like some sort of ancient tragic poem. Historians still argue whether laborers like these were slaves, paid workers, or something in between. Some inscriptions refer to bound workers provided by temple estates, essentially human assets attached to land. Others point to seasonal laborers who were compensated in barley or beer, which might sound like a festival, but trust me, it wasn't. You pause to sip water from a gourd passed down the line. It's lukewarm and vaguely gritty, but you're grateful. Beside you, a young boy, maybe 12, starts shaping bricks with startling efficiency. He doesn't look up. His hands move like they've always known this rhythm. A few bricks in, you begin to understand something profound. This is not glamorous work. No sweeping vistas. No heroic stories. Just repetition. Shape, flip, dry. Shape, flip, dry. It's quiet, exhausting, and oddly meditative, like breathing, but muddier. The man nearby hums as he slaps bricks into their wooden molds. His song is slow, repetitive, almost hypnotic. You ask him how long he's worked here. He shrugs. Since the second flood, he jokes. You laugh weakly, not sure if he's serious. It has been a wet year. Later in the afternoon, a supervisor strolls by, inspecting the piles. He carries a whip, but he isn't using it. He doesn't have to. Everyone knows the quota: 30 bricks by midday, or face the consequences. What those are isn't clear, but the woman in charge earlier has reappeared with that look again. So you press on. A moment of pride hits as you lay out your bricks in a neat row. They're not perfect, but they'll hold. Hopefully. If they make it through the drying stage without cracking, they'll be added to a house wall. If not, back into the pit they go. Recycled like failed memories. Lunch comes late. A lump of barley paste wrapped in a leaf and a few bites of salted fish. You eat sitting on a pile of rejected bricks, swatting away flies and watching as the next batch is already being shaped. No one complains. Complaining takes energy. Energy makes you sweat. Sweating makes the clay stick more. You think about the temples, the palaces, even the crumbling homes you passed on your way here. All of them built by people like this. Anonymous hands shaping a civilization, one sun-baked lump at a time. And still, you can't shake the itch. Everything here is itchy. Your arms, your legs, even your scalp. Maybe it's the straw. Maybe it's the mud. Maybe it's the slow realization that ancient glory was, quite literally, built on discomfort. The Sumerians didn't rise because of divine inspiration. They rose because someone kept mixing the clay, even when it was 38 degrees Celsius in the shade and the flies outnumbered the bricks. Back at the pit, someone starts joking about a coworker who accidentally fell into the drying trench last week. He was fine, mostly, but he left a full-body impression in half a dozen bricks. They're being used for the wall of a latrine now. He doesn't seem to mind, and that's the thing. There's a strange camaraderie here, the kind born from shared suffering and mutual sunburn. You're not alone in the mud. You're part of a long, sticky chain of humans doing what they've always done. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. By late afternoon, your back feels like an accordion that's been used as a doorstop. You stand by your completed bricks, drying in the sun, and wonder whether any of them will survive the next storm. Maybe, maybe not. But you've done your part. You leave the yard with the others, feet dragging, shoulders limp. Someone slaps your back and mutters something that might be not bad for a first-timer, or you look like a cracked jar. Honestly, you can't tell that as the group disperses back into the maze of alleys. You look back once more at the brickyard. A few figures remain, silhouetted against the setting sun, still slapping clay into molds with the steadiness of ritual. You close your eyes and hear it. Squish, slap, stack. Squish, slap, stack. The rhythm of the forgotten. You wake before sunrise again, because of course you do. The city never quite sleeps, and neither do you. Your limbs are still sore from the brickyard, but today, you're following the bricks instead of making them. You're off to see where these sun-baked rectangles go and how they become something more than just foot-busting obstacles on the street. The mud bricks, simple as they seem, don't live quiet lives. They're dragged, stacked, dried, stacked again, and eventually find themselves embedded into everything from fish markets to ziggurats. This morning, your guide is a man named Dullum, who builds walls the way some people build poetry, slowly, repetitively, and with little regard for applause. He's already chewing something that smells faintly of onions and bad decisions when you catch up with him. His hair is a strawy mess, his tunic is permanently stained with brick dust, and he has the posture of someone who's lifted too many things he shouldn't have. "You coming?" he grunts, waving a hand. You walk through half-built structures that look like they were abandoned mid-thought. Some walls are waist-high, others lean dangerously. Tools are scattered across the ground like confetti for a festival no one enjoyed. As you step into the site, Dullum tosses you a trowel. "It's heavier than it looks. Try not to embarrass yourself," he says cheerfully. You get to work under his watchful eye, smearing mud mortar. Yes, more mud, between layers of bricks. It's thicker than what you used at the brickyard, mixed with chopped straw, sand, and possibly the tears of previous apprentices. The smell is earthy with a hint of mildew, like old bread that's been emotionally neglected. That you're building a wall. Not a palace, not a temple. Just a wall, part of someone's future home, apparently. Not that you'll be invited inside once it's done. Brick by brick, the wall rises. There's no rush. You place a brick, press it down, check the alignment. Dullum corrects you constantly. "That's a wobble. That's a gap. That one's looking at me funny." You're pretty sure he's kidding. Probably. And here's the kicker. There's no cement, no steel rods, no fancy interlocking systems. Just sun-dried mud, stacked by eye, sealed by hand. And yet, it works. It's worked for thousands of years. Historians still argue whether ancient Mesopotamian architecture had formal training systems or if it was all apprenticeship-based. What's clear is that the knowledge passed through hands, not scrolls. You learn by doing, not diagramming. You pause for a moment and look around. Several other masons are at work nearby. One is singing softly, a wordless tune that drifts between the brick columns. Another balances precariously on scaffolding made of reeds and wishful thinking. Occasionally, a cart arrives with more bricks. You help unload them, each one slightly uneven, slightly unique. Some are cracked. Others bear the faint impression of a fingerprint, like the ghost of a worker's lunch break. Dullum points out how different projects use different kinds of bricks. The cheap ones for temporary stalls and livestock pens. The better-fired bricks, the ones kissed by kills instead of just sunlight, are saved for city walls, temples, and important thresholds. Apparently, a doorway is judged by its brickwork. No pressure. That he also tells you that bricks are sometimes stamped, not with a brand name, but with a ruler's insignia. It's a way for kings to mark territory without needing to show up in person. A bit like graffiti, he shrugs, but with more bureaucracy. You glance at a few of these royal bricks. The impressions are faint, almost invisible unless you know what to look for. A symbol, a name, maybe a little prayer. Someone wanted to be remembered, and this was the best they could do. Break time arrives without ceremony. Dullum sits on a low wall, drinks from a cracked jug, and eyes the sky like it owes him money. That he explains that building with mud bricks isn't about strength, it's about maintenance. These walls will last a while, but not forever. Maybe a decade. 2. If the gods are kind and the rain forgets how to fall, that's the thing most modern folks miss. Mesopotamian houses weren't built to last generations. They were built to be rebuilt, over and over, layer after layer. Sometimes they didn't even tear the old house down. They just leveled the floor and started fresh on top. That's why cities like Ur and Eridu look like layer cakes when archaeologists dig into them. Every generation stacking their life over the last like an unspoken agreement. You had your turn, now it's mine. You return to the wall, newly humbled. Every brick you lay might one day be covered up, forgotten, or reused as a footpath. You try not to take it personally. At one point, Dulum points to a neighbor's wall and shakes his head. They didn't let it dry long enough. Rain came, and it melted like a goat in a river. You mentally file this under bricks can melt, which no one tells you in school that as the sun lowers, the bricks start to glow with warm hues, red, gold, and soft brown. The wall you've been building stands half your height. It's crooked, slightly uneven, and probably won't win any awards. But it holds. And that's the only metric that matters here. Toward the end of the day, a child runs up to the site, barefoot and curious. He watches the builders, mimics their gestures with a stick, and then scampers off before anyone can give him a chore. You smile. Maybe he'll be back in 10 years, officially joining the crew. Or maybe he'll be a scribe. Or maybe a brick. You walk away with Dulum as the last light fades. He wipes his hands on his tunic and says, "You didn't ruin anything." That's rare. You thank him. He shrugs. Brickwork's not about perfection. It's about not giving up halfway. You look back one more time. The wall is still there, quietly absorbing the heat of the day, slowly cooling under the evening sky. You can't help but think it looks sleepy, just like you. The air this morning is already thick with the scent of wet clay, but today you're not heading to the brickyard or the construction site. No, today you're heading somewhere more prestigious, or at least more organized. You've been sent to observe the temple complex, where bricks take on a different kind of life entirely. And yes, that means another long walk through uneven alleys where every third corner smells like roasted onions or yesterday's fish stew. The temple district is less chaotic than the neighborhoods you've wandered through so far. You arrive to find high mud brick walls etched with smooth, repeating patterns. There are ramps and terraces and shaded courtyards where priests bustle about with armfuls of scrolls, baskets of incense, and an air of superiority thick enough to slice with a reed stylus that you're told that mud bricks are sacred here, not just practical. These aren't the slapdash bricks of market stalls or even the semi-respectable blocks from Dulum's walls. These are bricks that have been specially selected, dried, and sometimes ritually washed. They might even have been blessed by people wearing the ancient equivalent of robes so starched they probably chafe. You find yourself staring at a ziggurat in mid-construction. It rises like a giant layer cake out of the flat landscape, its base wide enough to host a street party, its upper levels tapering into the sky. Workers move along narrow ramps, dragging bricks and baskets slung across their backs, walking in a rhythm that's half religious chant, half grumble that a high priestess, introduced simply as Shama, appears from behind a curtain of reeds. Her voice is firm but oddly melodic, as if she spent her whole life explaining sacred concepts to people who just wanted lunch. She gestures toward the temple's inner sanctum, no entry for commoners like you, of course, and begins to explain how important brickwork is in divine terms. According to her, the very first temple was fashioned from bricks formed by the gods themselves. No mortal hands involved, just divine mud and celestial straw. You're pretty sure this wasn't covered in the brickyard training program. Historians still argue whether these tales were metaphorical, ceremonial, or something more literal in the eyes of ancient worshippers. What's clear is that the Mesopotamians didn't draw hard lines between building and believing. Every brick laid in a temple was an offering, an act of worship, even if it came from a sweaty teenager with sunburned shoulders. Shama leads you through a shaded corridor lined with engraved bricks. Yes, engraved. Each one bears a name or dedication. Kings, gods, constellations, and sometimes just curious symbols that scholars still puzzle over. You spot one brick with what looks suspiciously like a chicken doodle. Shama doesn't elaborate. She does, however, explain that bricks from demolished temples were often reused, but not before a purification ritual. You couldn't just toss divine mud into someone's vegetable patch. That's how you get cursed pumpkins. Probably. The deeper you walk into the temple's maze, the cooler the air becomes. The bricks here have been plastered and painted, vivid blues, ochres, and whites. Faded now, of course, but you can imagine how dazzling they must have been when first unveiled. This was architecture meant to impress gods and taxpayers. You reach a ceremonial kiln nestled at the edge of the complex. It's small, but sacred. Only certain bricks were fired here, those intended for inscriptions or for parts of the ziggurat that needed extra durability. Temple lore claimed these bricks could speak to the heavens. You resist the urge to press your ear to one that you meet an elderly artisan named Ebby, who is carving cuneiform into a damp clay brick with a pointed reed stylus. He moves slowly, almost reverently. Every stroke is a prayer, he says, or a complaint about the king, depending on who's reading. He chuckles, and you realize that even here, amid incense smoke and ceremonial humming, humor lives on. Ebby tells you that some bricks were buried inside temple foundations like hidden signatures. Others were left out in the open, their writing meant to catch the eye of gods and nosy neighbors. You look closer at one half-dried slab and notice it includes the full name of the current ruler, a mention of recent rainfall, and what might be a tally of sheep. Sacred gossip. It seems that at one point, Shama shows you a sealed chamber where bricks line the floor and walls. They're arranged like a puzzle, their inscriptions forming a continuous prayer. She whispers that no one is allowed to enter. Only the bricklayers who sealed it, and only once. You wonder if they snuck in a joke line or two. Something like, "Help, I'm stuck inside a brick box." As the day progresses, you're asked to assist with a blessing ceremony. Yes, you. A lowly outsider who still smells faintly of raw mud and goat. You're handed a clay figurine, probably meant to represent a house spirit, and asked to bury it beneath a fresh stack of bricks. It's meant to invite protection, good harvests, and presumably fewer termites. You kneel beside the foundation and gently push the little idol into place. The bricks settle over it like closing eyelids. For a moment, everything is quiet. You realize then that building here isn't just construction. It's a language, a slow, blocky, mud-scented language meant to be read by both humans and deities, even if the grammar sometimes involves goat dung. Shama nods her approval, and you're dismissed just as the evening drums start. You step out of the temple's cool heart and back into the wide plaza, where the ziggurat catches the last golden rays of the sun. It seems to glow, each brick a captured ember. You turn and walk away slowly, knowing those bricks will outlive you. And probably the temple staff, too. Maybe not the chickens, though. You awaken the next morning to the faint sound of donkeys braying and a rooster that sounds like it's given up halfway through its job. The mud brick alley outside your little guest dwelling is already warming under the rising sun, and the air has that earthy scent again, part dust, part baking clay, and just a hint of yesterday's fish. Today, you're headed to meet the scribes. Not the flashy temple priests or the brawny brick haulers, but the quiet thinkers with inky fingers and a remarkable tolerance for repetition. Their workplace isn't far, just across the plaza where someone's currently shouting about lost sandals again. You navigate around a sleeping dog, 3 children chasing a goose, and a man carefully balancing a tower of dried mud bricks on his head like it's the most normal thing in the world. Spoiler: here it is. The scribal school is a modest building made, surprise, of tightly stacked, sun-dried bricks. Inside, it smells of clay tablets and damp reed pens. You're immediately hit with the rhythmic sound of styluses tapping clay, like ancient typewriters operated by small, fidgety philosophers. The head scribe, a stern but not unfriendly man named Nidanu, waves you in. He wears a robe that might once have been white, but now carries the stains of several decades of ink, clay, and probably tears. You're shown to a seat and handed a wet tablet, cool, rectangular, surprisingly heavy. Beside it, a slim reed stylus with a triangular tip. Your writing journey begins. Nidanu speaks slowly, clearly used to training initiates who occasionally try to eat the stylus. He explains that brick inscriptions, those tiny wedge-shaped carvings, are more than just decoration. They're legal records, economic data, royal boasts, and sometimes curses written in polite grammar. The kind that says, "May your crops fail and your sandals always squeak," but with formal punctuation that you're guided through basic symbols. 1 for man, 1 for water, 1 for brick, obviously, and 1 for sheep. These 4 alone, you're told, can summarize half the business deals in the city. As your stylus bites into the clay, you're struck by how much effort it takes to make each mark. Not just precision, but pressure. Each letter feels like it wants to fight back. You can practically hear the clay muttering, "What do you want from me?" Nidanu gestures to a corner where several old tablets are stacked. He pulls one down and shows you what looks like a list of brick deliveries, names, dates, quantities, and even a little diagram. It's a Mesopotamian spreadsheet, only dustier and considerably heavier. The clay still holds the faint imprint of a thumbprint, probably from some long-dead accountant who had strong opinions about kiln scheduling. Historians still argue whether these records were created purely for administration or whether they carried more ceremonial significance. Some believe certain scribes had near-priestly status, their records so precise and permanent that they practically spoke for the gods. Others say, no, it was just bureaucracy. But here in this school, you feel like every tablet holds more than just numbers. It holds someone's voice. You ask Nidanu whether bricks themselves ever carried more personal messages. He nods and shows you a small brick fragment tucked away in a case. It's engraved with the name of a man, a date, and the phrase, "House for the peace of my mother." You don't need to be a historian to feel the tenderness behind it. Then, there's the weirder stuff that a student calls you over to show a practice tablet featuring a line that translates to something like, "The fishermen danced too early under the moon." Nobody knows what it means. It could be a proverb, a song lyric, or just a bored student trying to make his friends laugh for 1,000 years later. You find yourself rooting for that student. May his legacy endure forever. You get the sense that scribes didn't just record the mundane. They also slipped in the occasional joke, mistake, or poetic musing. There are surviving bricks with lines like, "The wall was strong," until it wasn't, and "May the gods bless this house and its goats," unless the goats eat the roof again. Apparently, goat-based roof damage was a recurring issue that a group of younger scribes begins reading a poem inscribed across 4 tablets. It's about a great flood, bricks washed away, and a man who tried to rebuild his home using clay mixed with beer instead of water. The moral, you guess, is don't drink your construction materials. Wise advice, honestly. The day passes with you hunched over your tablet, slowly understanding the rhythm of cuneiform. It's less like writing and more like carving thoughts into time. And when the tablet dries, that thought is fixed, permanent unless smashed, lost, or eaten by a very determined goat. You ask Nidanu if bricks themselves were ever used as storytelling devices. He smiles, for the first time fully, and tells you of a structure near the river, an old merchant house where each brick was marked with part of a story. When assembled in the right order, the walls told of a long journey, a betrayal, and a stolen shipment of spices. Sort of like living inside a mystery novel. If your house were a literal book, you leave the scribal school with sore fingers and a small clay tablet tucked into your belt. It carries your name and the words first attempt. It's uneven, awkward, and a little crooked. But it's yours, and suddenly, you understand why these people were obsessed with bricks. Each one is a message, not just to gods or kings, but to time itself. As the sun lowers and the bricks of the school cast long shadows across the plaza, you pause and glance back. The school glows faintly, its humble mud bricks hiding centuries of wisdom and at least one questionable fisherman proverb. You stroll away from the scribal school, the small clay tablet still warm in your satchel, and the dusty alleys of the city begin to glow with that golden hue you're starting to associate with Mesopotamian afternoons. There's a gentle breeze rolling in from the river, stirring up little whirlwinds of dry leaves, goat hairs, and the occasional papyrus scrap. It's the kind of wind that whispers secrets, though mostly about who forgot to feed their donkey, that you're heading to what the locals call a brick archive. That's right. Not a library, not a storeroom, but an entire building dedicated to bricks that talk. Figuratively, mostly. Tucked behind the main temple complex, the archive is a squat, square structure made, naturally, of mud bricks, though you suspect these particular bricks might be the most egotistical in the city. You duck through a low entrance, and inside, the temperature drops a few blessed degrees. The air smells like old clay, dried herbs, and the peculiar musk of history refusing to be forgotten. Shelves line the walls, each stacked with rectangular tablets and blockier, chunkier bricks, some engraved, some painted, all carefully cataloged. A sleepy attendant nods in your direction but doesn't get up. He seems to sense you're not here to cause a fuss that a young apprentice offers to give you a tour. She's enthusiastic, sharp-eyed, and speaks quickly, probably the only thing in Mesopotamia that moves faster than time. She leads you to the oldest brick in the collection. It's displayed alone in a glassless niche, cradled in a kind of ceremonial basket woven from palm fiber. The inscription reads, "Laid in the name of Enlil to hold back the waters." It's short, almost modest, and yet this brick was part of the first known levee in the city's history. You run your fingers over its rough surface. You can still feel the indents from where a craftsman pressed each wedge-shaped mark. Enlil may have been a god, but the person who carved this brick was very much human, probably sunburned, slightly overworked, and just hoping it wouldn't rain too hard that season. Your guide continues, pointing out other bricks with more elaborate inscriptions. Here's one with a curse on it. "May the one who removes this brick be cursed with boils and barren crops." Charming. You ask if the curse is still active, and she just shrugs. "I wouldn't test it," she says, with a grin that's only partly joking. She pulls out a brick with a series of tally marks on one side and a doodle of what looks like a sheep on the other. "We think this was a child's," she says. a practice brick, but it was found buried under a home, so maybe it was also a keepsake. Historians still argue whether these kinds of bricks were common sentimental objects or rare enough to be prized family heirlooms. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between love and leftover building materials. There's one section of the archive called the boasts. This is where the kings get their moment. Every brick here proclaims some version of I, name, built this wall, this temple, this road, this thing you are touching now. One in particular catches your eye. Uarnamu, king of Sumer and Akkad, builder of greatness, bringer of order, did construct this with divine approval and very straight lines. You pause. Very straight lines? Even in 2100 BCE, someone was humble bragging about their geometry. Your guide tells you some scholars believe these royal inscriptions weren't written by the kings themselves. No surprise there, but by scribes who specialized in public relations through brick. There's even a theory that some of these were copied and mass-produced, like ancient press releases. Which means somewhere, at some time, there may have been a scribe whose full-time job was to carve the phrase "glory to the king" 600 times a day. You try not to think too hard about how that compares to your own job in a darker corner. The Forgotten Project's shelf stands in quiet contrast. These are bricks recovered from buildings that were never finished, temples abandoned mid-construction, city walls that never extended beyond a few hundred feet, bathhouses that only ever held one awkward puddle. Their inscriptions speak of grand intentions, for the healing of the people, to honor the moon goddess, to house travelers from distant lands. Most were just left to crumble. You sit on a cool stone bench nearby and let your mind wander. These little bricks, each one so heavy, so blunt, carry entire ambitions, entire failures. There's something painfully human in that. How many bricks, you wonder, were part of someone's best idea? And how many ended up in the foundation of a goat pen anyway? You ask about color. Did bricks ever wear paint? Your guide nods and leads you to a bright little alcove where sunbeams light up bricks with faded pigments, reds, ochres, even a daring shade of indigo. For ceremony, she explains. Temples and royal tombs mostly. Sometimes homes, if they were rich enough to afford color. You look closer and see patterns, zigzags, waves, even a stylized lion with what looks suspiciously like a smile. She shows you a particularly weird example, a brick painted to look like a stack of smaller bricks. Optical illusion, she says. Historians still debate why. Some think it was artistic flair, others think someone misunderstood the assignment. You laugh quietly. It's the kind of joke you could only make in a room like this, surrounded by slabs of ancient ambition and the baked-in optimism of long-gone masons. As you prepare to leave, your guide hands you a little token, a replica of a brick fragment, smoothed and looped with twine. For luck, she says, and so you remember us. You slip it into your pocket, already warmed by your hand. Back outside, the city hums with that slow, heat-drunk rhythm again. Children chase a piglet down the alley. A man is yelling at his own shadow. And overhead, the sun starts to tip toward the horizon, casting long, sleepy shadows across the brick walls. The buildings seem to breathe with history, each layer of mud and straw whispering a little louder now that you've learned to listen. The soft clink of your lucky brick replica bouncing in your satchel adds a comforting rhythm as you wander through UR's southern districts. Here, things are a little quieter, less shouting, more shuffling. You pass rows of homes, their mud brick walls sun-baked into shades of tawny gold and tired beige. The scent of lentils cooking wafts from an open window, and somewhere a harp plinks out an uncertain tune that you're heading toward the edge of town, where the city melts into farmland. But first, you pass a peculiar building, low and circular, with no obvious sign of what it is. An old man lounging outside waves you in with a gnarled hand and a barely there smile. You look like someone who appreciates the beauty of quantity, he says, which feels both confusing and ominous. Inside, the air is thick with earth and old wood. The walls are lined with cubbies, each housing a differently shaped mud brick. Fat ones, long ones, thin as toast ones. Some are tagged with little clay markers, others with barely legible signs like Goat Shelter, Third Dynasty, or Rejected by High Priest, too crumbly. You've stumbled into a brick measuring station. Turns out, ancient Mesopotamians were obsessed with brick sizes. Not out of architectural precision. Well, not entirely, but because bricks were a form of accounting. Imagine if every time you paid your rent, it was with 400 medium standard temple bricks. The station master, who introduces himself as Gula's third cousin, tells you they even had names for them. The standard royal cubit brick, the small taxpayer's brick, and something ominously referred to as the penalty brick, which was deliberately heavy and awkward to lift. You try lifting one of the penalty bricks and instantly regret it. Your spine makes a sound like a startled frog. The old man chuckles. Used for people who didn't pay their debts, he explains. They had to deliver these, one by one. You imagine a conga line of debtors dragging bricks across town. It's both hilarious and a little depressing. Historians still argue whether these brick-based punishments were common practice or ceremonial scare tactics, meant more to threaten than to actually carry out. You suspect it's a bit of both, because people, even 4,000 years ago, were masters of passive-aggressive bureaucracy. Nearby, you notice a wall chart. It shows a diagram of how different bricks fit together depending on purpose. Temple walls, irrigation platforms, granary floors. There's even a festival alignment, a particular staggered brick pattern reserved for roads used during religious parades. Apparently, when the gods came to town, their chariots deserved maximum traction. You ask about innovations. Surely someone, at some point, tried something new. Gula's third cousin smirks and pulls out a strange specimen, a rounded brick. This, he says dramatically, was the curved corner brick, invented for those who hated sharp angles. He taps it like it's a rare fossil. Didn't catch on. Too avant-garde. As you sit in the cool shade of the measuring hall, he regales you with stories of brick disputes. Apparently, back in the reign of Ishbaera, there was a minor scandal when the palace tried to reduce the standard brick size to save on materials. Builders rebelled. A group of masons even held a sit-in, literally sitting on their bricks until the old size was restored. You raise an eyebrow. A brick strike? Oh yes, he assures you. Very peaceful, very stubborn. One particularly odd story involves a governor's wife who insisted on importing river-baked bricks from another city-state because she claimed they had better acoustics for singing. They say her voice echoed so sweetly through the hall, even the pigeons wept, he says, with a theatrical sigh. Historians still debate whether this anecdote is rooted in fact or just part of UR's growing list of domestic brick legends. Your host offers you a sweet drink made from fermented dates and barley. It tastes like someone dropped a fig into a bottle of vinegar, but it's oddly refreshing. He insists you stay to see his prized possession, a brick mold. Wooden, cedar, and passed down from my mother's cousin's neighbor's son, he announces proudly. The mold is surprisingly elegant, with carved grooves to help release the clay more easily. You note the tiny signature pressed into the corner, a maker's mark, early branding. Even in the ancient world, someone wanted credit. There's a moment of silence as he places the mold back into its cloth wrap, handling it like a newborn lamb. You ask what happens to the bricks that fail inspection. Too dry, too cracked, too lumpy. He gestures to a crumbling pile out back. They become fill, he says, laid under roads, hidden in walls. Part of things nobody sees, but everybody walks on. You sit with that thought a while. The idea that even failure had its place, that the imperfect bricks still supported homes, temples, and bathhouses. They still mattered, even if no one wrote their name on them. A low bell rings in the distance, signaling evening. The measuring hall begins to empty. Young apprentices gather their notes and tools, and one slips a half-finished brick under her arm like it's a loaf of bread. Gula's third cousin pats your shoulder. "Come back anytime," he says. "We're always finding new old things." You step outside into the cooling air. The sun now hangs low, turning the bricks around you amber and honey. Shadows stretch like melted taffy along the narrow streets. A small cat trails behind you for a few steps, then decides it has better places to be. Ahead lies the farmland, the next stop on your slow journey through this surprisingly rich world of baked mud. But for now, you pause at the edge of town and glance back. From this angle, your looks like it's made of brown sugar, its buildings softening at the edges. You realize that beneath your feet are layers upon layers of bricks, measured, cursed, forgotten, worshipped, and every single one has a story. You step into the outlying farmland of Uar, where the hum of insects replaces the clang of chisels and the mutter of scribes. The city fades behind you, brick by quiet brick, as irrigation canals snake through the soil like sleepy fingers. Here, things move slower, if that's even possible in ancient Mesopotamia, where nobody's exactly racing anywhere to begin with. As you make your way along the edge of a barley field, your sandals squelch faintly in the damp clay path. You crouch and scoop a bit of the earth, soft, rich, almost sticky. The very material that birthed Uar's brickwork is also what feeds its people. It's a little poetic. You half expect a passing goat to give you a knowing nod in the distance. Farmers bend low over rows of grain. Their movements are methodical, almost meditative, as they check roots, chase pests, and mutter softly to their crops. You join one of them, a woman with sun-dried skin and arms like woven rope, who greets you without surprise. "Come to learn about the dirt?" she asks, and frankly, it's not the worst invitation you've had all day. As she leads you through the field, she explains that brick production and agriculture are deeply intertwined. Most people think of mud bricks as architectural tools, but their creation depended heavily on seasonal rhythms. You needed water, lots of it, for the right clay mix. That meant brick-making thrived right after harvests, when canals were full but fields could rest. She gestures to a mound of discarded brick fragments piled near a makeshift shed. "We reuse everything," she says. "Old bricks, cracked bricks, broken bricks. They go into fences, storage pits, even animal pens. Nothing wasted. Not when everything comes from the same mud." You help her carry a basket of shards to a corner of the field where goats are lounging like retired accountants. She kneels and begins layering them into a low wall, not to keep goats in, but to keep the wind out. These fragments act as a windbreak, protecting young sprouts from gusts that could uproot them. Bricks, you realize, weren't just city things. They were woven into everyday life far beyond the walls of Uar. As you walk along the canal, she explains that farmers often kept small brick presses nearby. The excess clay pulled from irrigation ditches was a perfect source of material. While water was diverted to nourish barley, leftover silt and earth were shoveled into molds, sun-dried between tending to sheep or scaring birds away. A well-run farm didn't just produce food, it produced infrastructure, and it didn't stop there. Bricks were also used to mark property lines. You're shown a curious little monument near a palm tree, a barely legible mud brick stele, rounded at the top, with incised symbols on its face. It declares, in painstakingly wobbly script, that this field belongs to Ashara, daughter of Tilmun, and not to Sargon, son of nobody. The message is clear, and the passive aggression? Delicious. Historians still argue whether these property bricks were legally binding or simply desperate attempts to ward off grabby neighbors. Either way, there's something charming about the idea of boundary disputes being settled by literal walls of mud. Modern real estate could learn a thing or two that the farmer you're shadowing leads you to her storage hut, a simple affair made of, what else? Mud bricks. Inside, the air is cool and dry, and the shelves are lined with grain jars. She runs a hand along the inner wall. This brick here, she says, made by my grandfather. You raise an eyebrow. He pressed his thumbprint into every fifth one, claimed it kept snakes out. You check the walls. Sure enough, there's a faint spiral pattern, repeated every few bricks. Historians might scoff, but superstition or not, the snakes seem to have taken the hint. You make a mental note to thumbprint your next IKEA bookshelf, just in case. Out in the fields again, the farmer points to a group of kids stacking small bricks into a play fort. The mud is still soft. Their hands are covered in it. They giggle as they build a miniature ziggurat, complete with tiny stairs for invisible gods. You smile, watching history repeat itself on a smaller scale. Bricks weren't just tools. They were toys, symbols, canvases, even dreams. The woman laughs. One of them's already planning to be a builder, she says. Or a king. Hard to tell at that age. Back near the edge of the farmland, you pause beside an old tree. The trunk is wrapped in a crude brick circle, a kind of planter. There's no symmetry to it, no precision, just a spontaneous effort to care for something growing. You touch one of the bricks. It's crumbly, patched with moss. Not beautiful, but familiar, comforting. This is the true magic of Mesopotamian brickwork. Not in the grandeur of temples or the perfect lines of palace walls, but in these quiet, pragmatic acts. A wall to shield the seedling. A reused fragment to steady a jar. A property marker carved with petty sass. Each brick says, we were here. We needed something. We made it. And you realize that while empires rise and fall, while gods come and go, while historians bicker over dates and dynasties, the bricks stay. They crumble, yes, but they don't disappear. They simply return to the earth that birthed them. And when the time is right, someone scoops them up, adds a little water, and starts again. The farmer waves you off with a smile, already turning back to her barley rows. You take one last look at the sun-warmed fields, then follow the winding canal toward your next destination. The bricks beneath your feet don't make a sound, but somehow, you still feel them whispering. As the canal bends and the farmlands recede behind you, you find yourself approaching a low rise speckled with broken brick and long-forgotten debris. The air feels a little warmer here, not from the sun, but from the decades of kiln fires that once burned endlessly in this spot. You've wandered into what was once the industrial belly of a Mesopotamian city. The brickyard, doesn't look like much now. Just heaps of dried mud and shallow pits. But you can almost hear the clang of tools, the slosh of water, and the steady thunk-thunk of molds being slammed onto clay. There's something comfortingly repetitive about it all. This is where the magic happened. If your idea of magic involves hauling mud in 120-degree heat and arguing about brick ratios, you walk slowly past the remnants of a kiln, its arched mouth now collapsed, blackened bricks scattered like forgotten teeth. These weren't your everyday sun-dried bricks. No, these were the baked ones, the ones reserved for temples, fortifications, and people with serious architectural aspirations. Firing bricks took time, labor, and an ungodly amount of fuel, mostly wood and reeds. The result? A product that could last millennia, or at least long enough to give modern archaeologists something to dust off. You run your hand along a half-buried slab of fused brick and ash. It's surprisingly warm, as if it remembers the fire. One fringe theory, largely dismissed but endlessly fun, suggests that Mesopotamian kilns were sometimes fired during rituals, overseen by priests to bless the bricks. A divine stamp of approval, right there in the mortar. Historians still argue whether this was ceremonial theater or just an excuse to write off brick-making as a temple expense. The laborers here weren't always volunteers. Many were conscripted workers, commoners, debtors, prisoners of war, tossed into the dry heat with orders to churn out thousands of bricks per month. You imagine yourself among them, shirt soaked, mouth dry, fingernails caked with fine clay, rhythmically pressing damp mud into wooden molds. Press, flip, stack, repeat. One elderly man, long gone now but immortalized in a surviving tablet, once boasted of making 2,400 bricks in a single moon. Whether he was exaggerating or simply didn't sleep, we'll never know. But records show that quotas existed, and they were enthusiastic. Bricks were more than building blocks. They were bureaucratic units. They were counted, taxed, inspected. In fact, some tablets list complaints from foremen like, "These bricks are uneven," or "This batch dried too quickly." Useless. Ancient customer service, everyone. And yes, brick theft was absolutely a thing. You find that oddly satisfying. You step into a shallow basin, the clay pit. It's hard now, cracked like old skin, but you can imagine it wet and sticky, a giant puddle of potential architecture. Workers would wade in, knee-deep, mixing water and chopped straw into the earth, stomping and churning with bare feet. The straw acted as a binder, preventing cracks during drying. And the smell? Probably a heady mix of wet hay, sweat, and the occasional misplaced sandal. Interestingly, the brick molds themselves were standardized. Rectangular wooden frames, often producing bricks about 30 by 30 centimeters and 7 centimeters thick. That's just over an inch tall, thin, but efficient. And when demand spiked, molds would be shared between crews, marked with owner symbols to avoid accidental borrowing. You can picture the passive-aggressive tablet now. To the man who took my mold, return it, or I invoke Enlil's wrath. A few broken molds lie near a collapsed hut. You crouch and lift one. It's warped with age, but you can still feel the indentations where countless bricks were shaped. You imagine the hands that gripped it, the rhythm of production. There's a soothing monotony to it, almost meditative. Bricks weren't created in bursts of genius. They were the result of slow, repetitive work carried out by exhausted people who probably daydreamed about rivers and naps. Yet, despite the slog, there was pride. Some bricks, especially those for important buildings, were stamped with the names of kings. You walk over to a pile of discarded units, flipping one over. There it is, faint but legible. Uarnemu, builder of temples, son of Shulgi. He's long gone, of course. But this brick? Still here. Still solid. Still whispering. You sit for a moment on a sun-warmed stone, letting the imaginary hum of industry fade. You picture the brickyard at dusk as fires die down and workers trudge home covered in clay, their bodies aching but the day's quota finally met. Somewhere, a scribe is tallying numbers. Somewhere, a priest is inspecting samples. Somewhere, a kid is trying to carve a smiley face into a fresh slab before it dries. There's something weirdly comforting about the whole scene. Maybe it's the predictability of it, or the stubborn resilience. Maybe it's just the fact that these people made something real, something useful, with their hands, over and over again, for generations. They weren't building wonders. They weren't chasing fame. They were just making bricks. Enough to house their families. Enough to patch a crumbling wall. Enough to leave behind a footprint in the shape of a square. You stand and brush the dust off your hands. Ahead, the kiln shadows stretch long over the field, like fingers waving goodbye. You turn your back to the brickyard and continue on, one baked step at a time. You shuffle onward, the brickyard slowly fading behind you like a dream you almost remember. The air shifts, less smoky now, touched with something faintly sweet, earthy. You're headed toward the residential quarters. Not the palaces or priestly villas, mind you. Those are tucked safely behind walls and guarded walkways. No, you're wandering into the humble heart of Mesopotamian living. The average mud brick home, the streets narrow, just wide enough for 2 goats and a complaint. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, worn by countless bare soles over centuries. You duck slightly as you pass under an overhanging ledge. Someone once extended their roof just far enough to shade the family bread oven, and it still clings there, defiant and crooked. You pause outside a small rectangular building. Its walls are rough, mud bricks stacked with no grand flourish. The bricks here weren't stamped with royal names. They were slapped together by families, neighbors, maybe even bored teenagers avoiding chores. The mortar is flaking, but the structure holds. It always does. That's the secret of Mesopotamian homes. Simple, practical, endlessly patchable. Who needs marble columns when you can just slap on more mud? Inside, it's cool and dim. A single room, maybe 2 if the family had some means. You can make out the remnants of a central courtyard, really just an open-air rectangle with packed earth, where the kids probably played and someone hung wet laundry on a reed line. You spot a tiny corner shelf molded directly into the wall, still holding a fragment of pottery. Was it a bowl for dates? A place to store tiny secrets? Possibly both. It smells faintly of dust and clay. You imagine the daily rhythm. Waking up to the soft thud of a neighbor kneading dough, chickens muttering underfoot, someone cursing about the state of their roof after a windstorm. Inside, a woman stirs lentils in a clay pot over a hearth, the embers crackling softly. A toddler gnaws on a dried figure. A father smooths new mud over a crack in the wall while muttering that next year we'll add a second floor. He says that every year. It's a tradition. Historians still argue whether multi-story homes were common or a rarity reserved for wealthier folks. Some excavation sites show clear signs of staircases and upper levels. Wooden beams embedded in the walls support pillars, even collapsed floors. Others suggest these were added later, part of gradual household expansion. One thing's certain, Mesopotamians loved adding to their homes. If you had a flat roof and a cousin with extra bricks, why not build a guest room or, better yet, a snack terrace? And oh, the roofs. Flat, dry, and deeply underappreciated. They were the Mesopotamian answer to, well, everything. In the evening, families would gather on top to eat, tell stories, escape the heat. At night, they'd sleep there, under the stars, lulled by the sound of the city, soft conversations, clattering pots, a donkey stubbornly refusing to move. You picture yourself lying there now, wrapped in a thin linen sheet, staring at Orion's belt while mosquitoes make uninvited appearances that eye in one corner of the house. A brick bench juts from the wall. It's smooth from decades of use. A makeshift seat, a table, a bed for a sick child. Multi-purpose architecture brought to you by mud. You spot another feature, a small hole in the wall, just big enough for light and air. No glass, of course, just a carefully carved opening with a slanted lip to keep out the rain. You press your hand to it and feel the breeze whispering through. It's surprisingly elegant, this home. Not in the grand, symmetrical sense, but in its gentle usefulness. Every brick was placed with care, every crack repaired, every inch lived in. You can't help but admire the slow persistence of it all. These houses weren't monuments. They were containers for daily life. Births, arguments, spilled stew, lullabies. And mud brick held it all together. A small storage alcove catches your eye. Inside, there's a faded imprint on the back wall. Could have been from a jar. Or maybe a family member left a clay tablet behind. A love letter, a recipe, a record of debt. Tablets weren't just for priests and kings. Ordinary people kept them too. Some archaeologists have unearthed entire caches beneath home floors, stuffed into old jars, hidden in corners. Not secrets, necessarily. Just life, written down in wedge-shaped whispers. There's a charming rumor, never quite proven, that families used to bury little lucky charms in their walls. Tiny figurines of gods, carved animals, miniature tools, to protect the house, or perhaps just for fun. You imagine finding one now, a clay hedgehog, tucked behind a brick, watching you with lopsided eyes. He doesn't say much, but you feel safer knowing he's there. You move through the space slowly, like you're intruding on someone's yesterday. The walls close around you, not oppressively, but like a hug. It's quiet, peaceful. This wasn't the world of ziggurats and warlords. This was bedtime stories by oil lamp glow, whispered arguments about goats, and children learning to write their names in dust as you duck back outside. The heat returns in a gentle wave. The houses cluster close together, forming narrow corridors. A cat darts past your foot. Somewhere, someone is singing off-key. You smile. The grandeur of temples might be impressive, but this is where Mesopotamian life lived. Among humble bricks, shaped by hand, smoothed by generations, held together not by stone, but by rhythm and routine. You glance up at a rooftop. A sheet flutters gently in the wind. You imagine someone up there right now, watching you. Or maybe just enjoying the breeze after a long day of patching the wall for the third time this week. You keep walking. The mud brick world stretches out before you, warm, worn, and wonderfully unremarkable. You make your way through the dense cluster of homes, following the familiar curve of packed earth under your feet, and soon the smell in the air changes again. It's something more acrid, sharper than the dusty sweetness of the residential alleys. You're heading toward a part of the city that gets very little fanfare and epic poems, but mattered just as much. The waste pits. Now, don't wrinkle your nose. This is history, and it doesn't always smell like sandalwood and incense. Mesopotamians, as practical as ever, had to deal with the messiness of daily life just like we do. And yes, their solution was often just dig a hole and pile it all in. You approach one now. It's not the dramatic kind of pit you'd imagine. No yawning chasm or mysterious fumes. Just a shallow depression at the edge of the neighborhood, surrounded by a few uneven heaps of broken pots, cracked bricks, old ash, and other leftovers from people long gone. You crouch down and sift through the top layer. It's oddly peaceful. There's something intimate about garbage, isn't there? It's where the secrets go. A chipped bowl that someone dropped during dinner. A fragment of a comb. A bit of used clay from a child's writing lesson. Letters awkward and wobbly, like a toddler learning cursive. You hold a piece in your hand and can't help but smile. Someone probably cried over this once. Or maybe they just sighed and tossed it. Historians still debate just how organized these waste systems really were. Some believe there were designated zones, carefully placed dumps just beyond city limits, separated by type of waste. Others suggest it was more chaotic, with trash piles erupting wherever people felt like chucking things. One theory argues that broken bricks were often recycled right back into new construction, especially in poorer districts. After all, why make a new brick when your neighbor's roof just caved in? That's the thing about mud brick. It's not just recyclable. It practically begs to be reused. You spot a brick near the edge of the pit, its edges worn to softness. It probably served in 3 homes, a bench, and a bread oven before retiring here. You imagine it with a tiny crown. King of bricks, aged and wise, now taking a well-earned nap. Of course, not all the waste was construction-related. You find scorched seeds, brittle fish bones, and the occasional splinter of shell, remnants of meals long finished. There's a smear of what used to be pigment, maybe from a smashed jar of cosmetics. A small round stone, once part of a sling or a game. There's a whisper of everything here. Vanity, survival, creativity, boredom. At one point, a stray dog trots by, sniffs at a pile, then moves on with the same disappointed expression as someone checking an empty snack drawer. You nod at him. He gets it. History is not just written in monuments. It's moldering in middens, half-chewed and sunbaked. You find yourself oddly comforted by the idea. This isn't the kind of place tour guides would bring you to. But here, in the slow crumble of yesterday's discards, the texture of real life is clearest. There's no gold, no carved inscriptions. Just broken things, forgotten things. And somehow, that's where the most honest stories are. One shard of pottery you pick up has a faint engraving. A tally? A price? A grocery list? It's too faded to read, but you imagine a woman standing over it, squinting at the symbols and muttering, "Ugh, I knew I forgot the barley." Maybe her husband found it later and used it to scrape goat dung from his sandals. Romance isn't always grand gestures. It's in the shared detritus of getting through the day. There's another theory. Fringe, maybe, but you've got time to entertain it. That waste pits were occasionally repurposed as storage or even hiding spots. In times of invasion or chaos, what better place to stash your valuables than inside the one place no one wanted to poke around? There are whispered accounts of tablets or trinkets uncovered beneath layers of old ash. Was it accidental? Or was someone cleverly thinking, "No one ever checks under the fish bones"? You linger a little longer at the edge of the pit. The sun slants across it, turning the shards and bits of rubble into something quietly beautiful. A mosaic of mediocrity, yes, but also of endurance. These things lasted because no one bothered to cherish them. They were tossed, forgotten, and yet here they are. Just like the bricks. And just like the bricks, they have stories baked into them. If you're patient enough to look, you rise slowly, brushing your hands on your tunic. The dust clings, as always. Maybe a bit of history now clings to you too. A ghost of someone's leftovers. Someone who lived a perfectly ordinary life for 1,000 years ago, cursed their roof leaks, loved their children, and got very tired of lentils. It's humbling, isn't it? The quiet clutter of a world long gone, whispering from the places no one bothered to clean. You continue your stroll, now leaving the waste pits behind. Though some of the smell might be hitching a ride on your clothes. The path winds slightly uphill, and soon you're in a new district, one of those places where time stretches a little. It's the workshop quarter, and everything feels slower here. Not sleepy, exactly, just methodical. Your feet crunch across a mosaic of clay fragments and stray straw. Ahead, a man in a dust-covered tunic leans over a rectangular mold, pressing damp clay into it with the casual focus of someone who's done this every day for decades. His hands move with automatic grace. Scoop, pat, flip. Another brick, shaped and ready to dry under the sun. Another silent player in Mesopotamia's mud brick empire. This is the world of brick makers. Low status, back-breaking labor, but foundational to society. Quite literally. Every wall, every ziggurat, every humble bakery or bustling marketplace began here. You imagine generations of hands repeating this rhythm, century after century. Knead, mold, dry. The mud of history never stops moving. You nod politely to the brickmaker. He grunts in return, his forehead streaked with a river of sweat. He's been at it since dawn. Behind him, rows of freshly molded bricks stretch like a field of miniature graves, silent, rectangular, and all destined for walls that may never be thanked. Historians still argue whether these laborers were enslaved, contracted workers, or just poor folks trying to survive. Some cuneiform tablets describe quotas and rations, suggesting organized labor. Others hint at temple monopolies on production, with priests overseeing output for divine projects. The truth? Probably a bit of both. Mesopotamian society was as stratified as one of its ziggurats, and the clay itself? A mix of river silt, sand, and straw. Yes, the same kind of straw Moses allegedly had to fetch in another ancient tale. Without the straw, the bricks crumble too easily. With it, they hold just long enough. It's a balancing act. Not too dry, not too wet, not too loose. Just like baking a good loaf of sourdough, minus the carbs and the smugness that a young boy nearby stomps barefoot in a clay pit, mixing the mud with practiced enthusiasm. He glances at you and grins, feet squelching with every joyous step. You wave back, unsure whether to laugh or offer him a towel. He doesn't mind the mess. To him, this is life. Warm earth, calloused feet, and the smell of sun-baked promise. Not far from the clay pit, a kiln smolders gently. Most Mesopotamian bricks were sun-dried, but kilns were used for special batches, bricks destined for temples, palaces, or anywhere flooding might interfere. These fire-hardened beauties were the elite of the mud world. Tougher, darker, and significantly hotter to produce. You peer into the kiln's glowing heart and marvel at the flickering orange light that danced its way through history. Nearby, someone's etching something into a brick before it dries. This wasn't uncommon. Inscribed bricks were often used for major public buildings, like a nameplate, but on every single component. Built by the order of King What's His Name, in the glorious year of the Goat Festival. You can't help but think of it as the ancient version of corporate branding. Every time you walk past a wall, boom, another shout out to the boss. You run your fingers along a stack of bricks drying in the sun. They're warm, like sleepy cats. Each one slightly different. Some with stray pebbles, some with the faint imprint of a hand or a toe. Mistakes frozen forever. There's a comforting humility in it. These weren't made to be perfect. They were made to function. And they did. One oddity catches your eye. A brick with a faint circular pattern pressed into it. A fingerprint? No, too wide. You squint. It's a seal impression, maybe from a supervisor marking batches, or an overseer ensuring quotas were met, or perhaps from a priest, blessing the bricks before they became sacred walls. Theories vary, of course. Some scholars even suggest personal seals were used by workers to mark their day's output, an early form of time cards. If you will, you step back and take in the whole scene. The boy in the pit, the man at the mold, the kiln's steady exhale, the sun above, the mud below. This is how civilizations were built, not with thunderclaps or swords, but with repetition, with rhythm, with the squish of wet earth between your toes and the scrape of straw across your palm. And while rulers built statues of themselves, it was the brickmakers who kept building everything else. No grand epics were written about them. No soaring hymns chanted their names. But they knew their legacy wasn't in poetry. It was in durability, in permanence, in the fact that thousands of years later, you're standing here looking at their work and still whispering, wow. You take one last look at the rows of bricks, lined up like sleepy soldiers waiting to be called into battle. Not glamorous, not glorious, but absolutely essential. You continue on, the clay dust clinging softly to your feet. You don't shake it off. You wander on, brushing the clay dust from your fingertips, and the narrow lane opens into a courtyard shaded by awnings of woven reeds. The heat hangs in the air like a wet blanket someone forgot to wring out. But here, in this quiet square surrounded by mud brick walls, something slightly different is unfolding. A group of workers is doing nothing. Well, not nothing exactly. They're sitting. Some chew dates. Others tap their sandals rhythmically against the ground. One man, eyes half-lidded, leans against a stack of bricks, humming a tune older than your dental plan. It takes you a moment to realize what's happening here. This is the Mesopotamian equivalent of a union break. The ancient version of leaning on a shovel while staring meaningfully into the distance. And you get it. After shaping, stamping, and drying thousands of bricks under the unforgiving sun, sometimes you just need to flop down next to your product and appreciate the sheer monotony of it all. One of the workers, older, sun-darkened, a bit of straw stuck behind his ear, turns to you and grins. They'll dry faster if you stare harder, he jokes in a thick Akkadian accent. You chuckle, even if you only half understand him. Labor humor is universal, it seems. But the truth is, this rest period isn't just laziness. It's part of the rhythm of ancient work. Mesopotamian days were ordered around the sun, not the clock. People worked when it was cool, rested when it was scorching, and went back at it when the shadows grew long. The idea of a rigid 8-hour shift? Historians still argue whether such structure even existed. Most agree work was task-based. Make 300 bricks, then you're done. Or, more realistically, when you're done, we'll tell you you're not. Nearby, you spot a clay tablet half buried under a bench. Someone left it behind, likely a scribe's tally. You carefully nudge it upright. The faint scratches are almost too faded to read, but a nearby boy jumps up and excitedly offers to help. This one's a count of workers and how many bricks they made today, he says, squinting. So yes, productivity tracking is nothing new. Though instead of spreadsheets and Slack notifications, you had clay tablets and someone squinting across the field yelling, "Hey, cuter, that's only 290. Before you made a few more just to hit quota." Some scholars have tried to reconstruct daily routines from these tablets, cross-referencing brick tallies, rations distributed, and temple logs. But the picture remains fuzzy. Did they sing while they worked? Did someone keep time with a drumbeat? Or was it just the slosh of mud and the size of overworked wrists? No one really knows. That's part of the charm. You notice a large amphora tucked into the shade, and beside it, rows of clay drinking cups, one for each worker. Communal water, a basic but vital part of surviving this heat. You sip from one after a hesitant sniff and find it lukewarm but welcome. In a world of sun-scorched labor, hydration was probably the closest thing to joy. And that little boy, he's still talking, bless him. Now he's pointing out where each worker sits during the breaks. That's Naram. He tells the best jokes. That's Ishbai. He once fell asleep in the drying yard and woke up sunburnt like a roasted fish. You laugh. Then he leans in conspiratorially. That man over there? He swears one of his bricks has a curse carved into it. A curse? Now your ears perk up. Brick curses were rare but not unheard of, especially on temple or palace bricks. Something along the lines of, "May the god Enlil smite anyone who removes this brick or speaks badly of the king." Charming stuff. Imagine if modern bricks said, "Do not uninstall, or your microwave catches fire." But again, it wasn't superstition for fun. It was a mix of reverence and fear. These bricks weren't just material, they were meaning. They held sacred purpose, civic identity, even cosmic order. The temples and palaces were considered the axis between the heavens and the earth. Removing a brick? Might as well unplug the universe's when you see a few bricks etched with wedge-shaped symbols, barely visible. You can't help but wonder, was this a name? A curse? Or just a doodle to pass the time while your hands dried? A few kids run past, their laughter echoing against the walls. One of them has fashioned a toy card out of discarded brick molds. Another pretends to be King Shulgi, sitting on a pretend throne made of sun-dried bricks while commanding the others to fetch him dried figs. It's all strangely touching, how even in this dusty, bone-tired place, life insists on being playful, and you, still standing there, realize how different this version of civilization feels. It's slow, yes. Repetitive, sure. But it's not aimless. These people are building permanence in a world where floods can wipe out entire cities. They're carving meaning into mud, hoping it holds. And in some strange way, it does. You step out of the courtyard, hearing behind you the rhythmic laughter and sloshing of water jars. No one's working right now, but they will, because the mud doesn't stop coming and the walls don't build themselves. Rest, in ancient Mesopotamia, was just a pause between bricks. As you ease away from the shade of the courtyard, the noise of the resting workers fades into the background, replaced by a soft tapping, quick, precise, rhythmic. You follow the sound down a slightly curving path lined with low, mud brick buildings. These structures look a little sharper, better maintained, and just slightly smug about it. You're approaching the Scribes' quarter. Yes, even in a world built from mud, someone had to keep track of which mud went where and why. And so, tucked among the dust and straw of Mesopotamian life, you find the keepers of clay and code, the scribes, the quiet bureaucrats, the original spreadsheet warriors. You step into one of the smaller rooms where the tapping grows louder. Inside, two scribes sit cross-legged on mats, each hunched over a damp clay tablet. One scratches lines with a stylus, his strokes clean and deliberate. The other pauses often, squinting at the tablet as if it's personally insulting him. You've seen this expression before, on someone trying to remember their password for the fourth time. The room smells like damp earth and reeds, with a faint hint of warm oil from a nearby lamp. Stacked in the corner are dozens of clay tablets, all labeled and categorized. This stack for brick inventories, that one for temple rations, another for worker rosters. It's not glamorous work, but without it, the city would collapse into absolute mud-splattered chaos that a scribe notices you and gestures to a tablet nearby. You pick it up carefully, still slightly soft around the edges. The symbols are neatly carved, a record of brick deliveries for the ziggurat expansion. 3,000 bricks from Uruk pit, 2,000 from Southern Yard, all counted and verified by Edamanenki's supervisor, it reads. Probably accompanied by some muttered curses about the quality. You sit quietly as the scribes continue their work. One of them speaks as he writes, murmuring each symbol aloud like a chant. It's soothing in a way, this steady cadence of clay and thought. Cuneiform, the writing system etched into these bricks and tablets, is one of the oldest in the world. Wedge-shaped impressions made with a reed stylus, baked into permanence. Invented not for poetry, but for ledgers. Before love letters or lullabies came math. Historians still argue whether scribes were mere clerks or part of a higher bureaucratic class. Some served temples. Others were employed by merchants or estates. A lucky few even worked directly for kings, entrusted with edicts and archives. Regardless, they were respected. You had to train for years, memorize thousands of symbols, and write so precisely that even your clay tablets had good posture. Not on one wall. A child's practice tablet hangs on a string. The marks are wobbly, half-formed signs for sheep, grain, and the ever-important brick. You smile. Someone's first homework. Someone's early frustration. Maybe the Mesopotamian equivalent of "my name is Lulu," repeated 5 times until she got the line straight. Who says history isn't cute? As you stand, the scribe hands you a fresh tablet to try. You take the stylus, it's lighter than expected, and press it into the soft clay. The impression wobbles. You try again. Better. After 3 more tries, it sort of resembles a symbol. Maybe for brick. Maybe for wobbly snack tray. Hard to say. The scribe gives a small nod, equal parts amused and condescending. You have potential, he implies, if you're willing to spend a decade practicing under the punishing eye of a tutor who throws styluses when displeased. Outside the writing room, a small brick is propped against the doorway. It's stamped, not with a name or an official seal, but with what looks like a riddle. You peer closer. I am born of earth, but die in fire. I build the strong, yet shatter with time. What am I? You grin. The answer's obvious. Still, you appreciate the poetry. Even bureaucrats need hobbies. Further down the path, you find another room, larger, with more scribes and rows of damp tablets laid out like cookies on a cooling rack. This, you're told, is the central archive. Temple orders, tax collections, court records, and, yes, brick shipments. So many brick shipments. Here, you realize, mud became memory. Bricks were more than walls. They were receipts, records, stories. Every one of these dusty, thumb-worn tablets is a whisper from the past. We ordered this many. We built this wall. We paid this much. Small statements, collectively monumental. One peculiar tablet catches your eye. It's shaped like a brick, but smaller. Carved into its surface is a strange symbol, a fish riding a chariot. You blink. A joke? A personal sigil? Or maybe some ancient meme? Scholars are still unsure what some of these odd symbols meant. Were they puns? Curses? Inside jokes? Or simply decorative nonsense? One theory holds that some scribes slipped in doodles when bored. Ancient marginalia, preserved in clay. You take one last look at the scribes, still hunched over their tablets, still murmuring, still scratching the day into permanence. They won't be remembered like kings or warriors, but their work lasts. Their bricks talk. Long after the palaces fell and the statues crumbled, these little clay voices remain, clear, chatty, and entirely unimpressed with your handwriting. As you exit the scribe's quarter, you feel a strange sense of calm. You've just witnessed how bureaucracy, that slow and cranky creature, helped hold civilization together. Brick by brick, line by line, tablet by tablet, and somewhere behind you, a scribe mutters about smudged symbols and sloppy styluses. Business as usual. You walk away from the scribe's quarter, the rhythm of styluses on clay still echoing faintly in your ears like a sleepy metronome. As you follow the shaded footpaths between mud brick houses, the dry air carries with it a new scent, something sharp and a little sour. You wrinkle your nose, and almost immediately, your answer waddles into view. Pigs. Well, technically wild boars, or something in between the boar and pig spectrum. These aren't the cute, curly-tailed cartoon pigs. These ones snort like they're offended by your sandals and regard you with a suspicious sideways stare. A few scurry past, weaving between pins and piles of leftover straw. Behind them, a group of workers crouches around shallow pits of dark water, stirring with sticks and muttering complaints that you've arrived at the mud brick recycling yard. Yes, even ancient civilizations had a form of, let's call it, sustainable deconstruction. In Mesopotamia, bricks were reused constantly. Because, let's face it, when your city is basically a giant layer cake made of dirt and straw, things tend to crack, sag, or just dissolve under a surprise rainstorm. Rather than let all that building material go to waste, they just melted it back into reusable sludge. And that's exactly what you're watching now. A team of workers hauling broken bricks, soaking them in water, and stirring them until they collapse into thick, goopy mud. It's strangely satisfying, in the way watching someone mix brownie batter is satisfying. If brownie batter smelled like pigs and fungus, one man scoops the mixture into a broad flat pan and begins smoothing it out. Another pats a mold into place. Within minutes, a new brick is born from the soggy remains of its crumbled ancestors. You can't help but whisper, "The circle of life," under your breath, and then immediately regret it, because one of the pigs makes eye contact like it understood the joke and disapproves. A foreman saunters over and explains the process. Old bricks are sorted, some too weathered to reuse, others just cracked enough to warrant a second life. The reusable ones get soaked and remolded. The rest, crushed for fill, or tossed into the riverbanks as crude erosion control. There's a kind of poetry here. Cities building themselves from their own remains. A quiet cycle of decay and renewal, like composting but with architecture. The mud brick wasn't just a tool of growth, but of rebirth. Historians still argue whether this reuse was driven by economic thrift, religious beliefs about cyclical renewal, or just the Mesopotamian version of reduce, reuse, recycle. Some temples, for instance, built new extensions using the pulverized bricks of previous shrines, possibly a symbolic act, blending the sacred past into the holy present. Others suggest it was simply practical. Making bricks was labor-intensive, so if you could reuse what you had, why not? As you stroll past the mixing pits, one worker leans on his paddle and tells you that sometimes they find strange things inside the old bricks. Fossilized reeds, half-burned seeds, and once, a tiny ceramic amulet pressed into the clay. Forgotten charms, probably meant to protect a house or a child's room, now squashed and reborn into someone's barn wall. Further along, you come upon a pile of half-dried bricks stacked for reuse. They're still soft in places. If you pressed a fingertip in too firmly, it'd leave a permanent print. Some already bear faint signs of reuse, stamps that were never fully smoothed out before being pressed into new molds. The ghost of a temple seal overlapping with the rough scratch of a merchant's mark. These bricks carry palimpsests, layers of memory, like reused parchment. Mud had history built into it. You pick one up. It's heavier than it looks. Damp, spongy, and covered in straw that sticks to your hands. It smells of wet grain and old sweat. But still, this humble thing once held up a house. Maybe a school. Maybe a shed where someone invented the concept of a 5-minute break 4,000 years ahead of schedule. And as unglamorous as it looks, it worked. These bricks were reliable. Mesopotamian homes were often rebuilt several times, but the materials stayed familiar. The very walls had memory. A quirky tablet nearby features a set of instructions etched into the clay. It outlines the official method for evaluating old bricks. Check for moisture, test crumble resistance, rehydrate for exactly 6 hours. It's part recipe, part bureaucratic gospel. You half expect it to end with serves 4 priests and a goat. You wonder if someone ever tried to shortcut the process, maybe skipped the full soak or tossed in extra straw to cover a weak batch. And what then? Did the walls sag? Did someone's kitchen dissolve mid-dinner? Historians haven't agreed on whether shoddy bricks caused any major collapses, but at least one Babylonian tablet curses a brickmaker by name. Apparently, someone was not thrilled about their home spontaneously turning into pudding. Back at the yard, the pigs are settling into a shady corner, ignoring the workers and the brick molds. You notice one of them licking a wet brick. Bold move. Perhaps it's a brick connoisseur. Perhaps it just has no idea what food is. A boy nearby giggles and slaps the pig's side. He offers you a chunk of date bread, and you accept. It's warm and sweet, and it crumbles like dried clay in your mouth. You both sit for a moment, watching the mud churn, the molds press, and the sun dry rows of recycled rectangles into new purpose. And as you chew, the truth settles in. In this land, nothing was wasted. Not time, not effort, not even mud. Every crumb, every scrap, every cracked wall was reborn. That pig might someday live in a house built from the bricks it licked today. Circle of life indeed. You brush the crumbs off your robe, thank the boy, and continue on. The brick yard fades behind you. The cycle keeps turning, quietly and without applause. You drift onward, toes kicking up soft dust as you leave behind the oddly soothing chaos of the recycling yard. The hum of the workers' chatter fades, replaced by a lower, steadier sound, the rhythmic slap of water. You follow it like a lullaby, stepping between vines of irrigation canals and clay pipes, until you arrive at the edge of something much larger. A river. Not the mighty Euphrates or Tigris themselves, more likely one of the countless offshoots, a man-made canal diverting life-giving water into the heart of the city. On its muddy bank squats a low structure with a sloping roof and gaping doorways. It doesn't look like much, but what it lacks in flair, it more than makes up for in smell. Welcome to the brick curing facility. Or, to call it what the locals probably did, the place where bricks go to sweat. Inside, the temperature rises a few degrees. Your skin dampens almost instantly, and there's a strong, earthy scent, moist straw, wet clay, and something oddly sweet. Sunlight pierces through roof slats and dusty shafts, and in those beams sit stacks upon stacks of fresh mud bricks. Drying, hardening, becoming. The Mesopotamians were obsessive about the curing process. Bake a brick too soon, and it cracks. Wait too long, and it's vulnerable to mold, theft, or, historically documented truth, wild donkeys stepping on it. One scribe actually filed a complaint about that. You walk the aisle slowly, brushing fingers against the warm, sun-baked edges of a newly set stack. They feel firm, but still hold a whisper of dampness. These aren't kiln-fired, at least not most of them. They're sun-dried, a process that takes days, sometimes weeks, depending on weather. And in this age, the weather is a full-time coworker. Someone passes by carrying a clay tablet under one arm, fanning their face with it. He stops, glances at the bricks, and makes a small mark on the wall. Drying time log. Mesopotamians loved keeping track of things. Inventories, rainfall, goat transactions, even how many bricks dried properly on a Thursday. Historians still argue whether these logs were strictly practical or if they had ceremonial importance, like a way to thank the gods of sun and mud for a successful batch. You duck under a crossbeam and spot an oven-like room toward the back, one of the rare places where bricks are actually fired. Not common, but essential for structures exposed to more wear and water. Aqueducts, public baths, temple foundations. The kind of projects you don't want dissolving mid-ceremony. The firing room is hot. The kind of hot that wilts thoughts. A boy sits on a stool by the opening, half asleep, fanning the coals with a reed bundle. He startles awake when you approach, then shrugs and offers you a seat. You take it. It's not exactly cool, but at least its shade that a stack of fired bricks nearby bears distinct stamps. Cuneiform impressions, pressed in while the clay was still soft. It's like graffiti from 4,000 years ago. Some are official markings, temple names, overseer titles. Others, more personal. One reads something that loosely translates to, "The god Nergal is watching." Not creepy at all. "Thanks, brick." You reach out to touch one, and it's warm and dry. The fired bricks have a different personality, more solid, more permanent. Where sun-dried bricks crumble with age, these endure. Some scholars believe fired bricks were a kind of prestige item, used in special buildings to show status. Others argue it was purely functional. But either way, these fire-forged bricks have a reputation for stubborn survival. In fact, it's thanks to some of these bricks that we even know about Mesopotamia. Entire walls, temple steps, ziggurat foundations, preserved not because someone meant to protect them, but because someone decided to bake a bunch of dirt on a very hot afternoon 40 centuries ago. You lean back, eyes following the play of light on the drying racks, and for a moment, it feels timeless. As if this whole facility has been gently breathing for thousands of years, exhaling steam and tradition with each cured brick that a teenage girl enters carrying a basket of straw. She spreads it evenly across the floor where a new mold has just been pressed. Insulation, absorption, 1,000 tiny reasons passed down by generations. She hums under her breath, a melody lost to history but comforting in its simplicity. You don't recognize the tune, but it feels right. Next to her, a wall displays an experimental pattern of bricks, angled differently, not quite in rows. You squint. It's almost decorative. Scholars discovered that some Mesopotamians tried artistic brick arrangements in key buildings, not just for beauty, but maybe even for ritual alignment. Or maybe someone just got bored stacking straight rows and decided to zigzag. No one's sure. And historians still debate whether these patterns were standardized or left to individual builders' taste. You look around and see it all differently now. Not just a factory, but a place of quiet transformation, a cradle of industry, a school of patience, a temple to the sun. Even if nobody calls it that, a shout outside draws your attention, someone yelling about a collapsing brick cart. You hear a thud, followed by very colorful words in a language long dead. The teenage girl sighs and keeps humming. You rise, give her a nod, and step back into the daylight. The river sparkles beside you. The bricks behind you continue their slow journey from sludge to stone. And you keep walking, one foot crunching in dust, one ear tuned to the pulse of a city made of mud and memory. The sun hangs low now, painting everything in slow gold. You wander farther down the canal, past faded etchings in clay walls and barefoot children skipping stones between stretches of stacked bricks. The air smells of silt and something cooking, grain, maybe, or lentils with just enough spice to make your stomach grumble. You turn a corner and almost miss it. A small courtyard, tucked between two broad administrative buildings, where something curious is happening. A man is talking to a brick, not in frustration, like a modern builder might when their wall crumbles, but in measured, ceremonial tones. You pause, hidden in the shadow of a colonnade, and listen to he's performing a kind of dedication ritual. Not grand like a temple ceremony, but deliberate. The brick is placed gently into a foundation trench while prayers are murmured. You recognize the rhythm, if not the words. It's hypnotic, almost sleepy. You didn't expect this, a spiritual relationship with bricks. But here it is. Archaeologists have discovered inscribed foundation bricks under palaces and temples, engraved with blessings, invocations, even threats against future renovators. Disturb this brick, and may the gods chew your crops and curse your goats. Paraphrasing, but you get the idea. This wasn't just building, it was anchoring belief to earth. And here, even mud can carry meaning. You move on, circling behind the administration hall. These buildings are different, more refined. Carefully measured rows of bricks, perfectly straight walls, and a noticeable lack of donkey hoof prints. You've entered the heart of bureaucratic life, where tablets are stored, arguments are logged, and brick production is balanced like a divine ledger. You peek through an open doorway. Inside, a small archive room holds shelf after shelf of clay tablets. Not books, not scrolls. Solid, squat, tactile bricks of knowledge. There's something undeniably satisfying about it. Like the past is pressing gently against your palm that a woman in a blue-gray robe is reading from one, squinting in the dim light. The stylus marks are faint but precise. She looks up, eyes narrowing when she sees you. For a moment, you expect a rebuke, but she gestures for you to come closer. You do. Quietly, like a cat on baked clay. She taps the tablet and says a word you don't understand. You nod anyway. She's pointing to a chart, production figures. How many bricks were molded, cured, delivered? Names of workers. Timestamps, almost. A 4,000-year-old spreadsheet. She flips the tablet over. On the back, someone has doodled a bird. Not part of the record, just a little whimsy from a bored scribe. Historians still argue whether these were tolerated creative flourishes or potential signs of workplace dissatisfaction. Personally, you think it was just an early version of doodling during a long Zoom call. You thank her with a nod and exit. Your feet crunch over tiny shards of discarded clay, test fragments, broken records, abandoned prototypes. Even trash here feels historic. Ahead, a low brick wall surrounds a sunken area. You peer inside and find yourself looking at the remnants of a kiln, no longer in use, but still commanding respect. Darkened with soot, cracked with age. This one was probably used for ceremonial bricks, those rare ones glazed in brilliant blues or carved with sacred script. You imagine the heat it must have held, the blinding fire that once roared inside it. It's quiet now. Cool. Almost humble. You keep walking. As dusk deepens, the city takes on a new texture. The bricks seem to exhale the warmth they've absorbed all day. Some glow faintly in the fading light, like warm coals buried beneath layers of dust. You run a hand along one of the alley walls and feel the day's sun whisper against your skin. A nearby residence door opens. Inside, a small family is gathering for the evening meal. Clay lamps flicker. The walls are, of course, made of brick, but they've been plastered and painted with simple images. Birds, Rivers, a woman kneading dough. The room is quiet, peaceful. You catch a waft of spiced lentils again, and your stomach lets out an embarrassing little growl. No one hears. Probably. You walk on, and the city begins to settle. Workers return home, children are called in, and the buzz of hammers and carts is replaced by quiet conversation and the soft scrape of sandals on clay paths. As the stars blink into being, you arrive at a half-finished building, clearly in progress, with stacked bricks neatly lined up along the perimeter. A man sits nearby, humming and whittling a piece of wood. He sees you, nods, and gestures toward the stacked bricks. You step closer. Each brick bears a small notch or mark. Not a stamp, more personal. The builder's signature, maybe, or a simple accounting trick. There's debate about these two. Some scholars believe they were used to track piecework payment. Builders paid per brick laid. Others think it was about quality control. Maybe pride. You crouch and inspect one of the marked bricks. It's surprisingly smooth, with a fresh, cool scent that tells you it hasn't fully cured. The mark is a triangle with a dot. You imagine the builder's hand forming it, maybe using the tip of a stylus or a shaped reed. The man gestures again, inviting you to sit. So you do, on a warm, slightly uneven pile of bricks. Not the most ergonomic seating, but there's something comforting about it. You sit in companionable silence. Around you, the city winds down. Lights dim, clay ovens cool, and bricks, those patient little slabs of time, continue to harden in the dark. Somewhere, a dog barks. A lullaby drifts through the air from an open window, and above, the stars shimmer like they've done every night since the first mud brick met its mold. You close your eyes for a moment, just long enough to feel the rhythm of the place settle into your bones, just long enough to almost forget you're not from here. The night deepens. You stir gently on your warm brick perch and blink against the hush that's taken over the city. Only the softest sounds remain. The shuffle of reed mats being laid, a donkey's sigh, a faint splash in a canal. It's as if the entire civilization has drawn a blanket of silence over itself. You rise, brushing dried clay dust from your palms, and resume your slow amble. The stars above seem close, impossibly so, as if you could reach out and tap them like wet bricks stacked for curing. Your steps lead you to the edge of the city, where the buildings grow lower and the walls more crumbly. This part isn't abandoned, exactly. It's just tired. Here, you find something surprising: piles of broken bricks. Chipped, warped, misshapen ones. The rejects. The graveyard of geometry. Some are cracked down the middle, others bloated or blistered from poor drying. They sit in silent heaps, a reminder that even a civilization as brick-obsessed as this one had a margin of error. You pause, crouch, and pick up a broken half. It's oddly beautiful. A burnished red curve with visible straw sticking out from one side. You trace the ridges with your finger. Someone molded this. Someone tried. But in the end, it wasn't chosen for the wall. Historians still debate what happened to these bricks. Were they recycled, ground down for filler, or simply tossed aside, their short, sun-baked lives ending in silent retirement beneath the desert moon? One theory suggests rejected bricks were used in temporary construction, walls for festivals, or mock-ups of city layouts. Another claims they had ritual use in funerary rites. Still another simply shrugs. Sometimes a broken brick is just a broken brick. And yet, there's a tenderness to this forgotten pile. It's not glamorous, not ceremonial, just quietly honest. You continue walking and spot a low platform up ahead, a viewing point of some kind. You climb it, carefully, since it's definitely not OSHA compliant, and gaze out over the sleeping city. From here, The bricks all blur into one mass. Buildings and roads, ovens and walls, even the ziggurat in the distance, all merging into a single expanse of ancient texture. It's beautiful, in the same way a field of wheat is beautiful, not flashy, but consistent, reassuring, deeply lived in. You sit on the edge and let the view settle into your body, and then you notice something just beyond the city. Mountains, odd, lumpy hills in the moonlight, too regular to be natural. You wander toward them. As you approach, you realize what they are: ruins. Old ones, even older than the city you just came from. These are the remnants of the city before the city. Collapsed walls, scattered pottery, and, you guessed it, disintegrated bricks. These didn't survive the centuries like the others. They've melted back into the earth, slowly reabsorbed by the very soil they sprang from. You kneel beside one of the mounds and run your fingers through the top layer. It's powdery, almost soft. Once upon a time, this was someone's home, someone's temple, someone's fish and barley snack stand. And now it's fine dust under your nails. It's humbling, and yet also strangely hopeful, because unlike stone, which resists and defies, mud brick returns. It recycles itself. A bad monsoon, a few centuries of abandonment, and presto, it's back to being dirt, ready to begin again. You sit by the mound for a while, letting that idea wrap around you. The cycle of use, decay, and rebirth. How these bricks aren't just things, they're participants in time. They live, they serve, and when they crumble, they feed the next round. You think of modern concrete. Steel, glass, shiny, sterile, unyielding. We build for eternity, but we rarely consider the kindness of impermanence, of something designed to melt back into the world. Maybe the Mesopotamians knew something we've forgotten, or maybe they were just practical. Either way, you can't help but admire them for it. The breeze picks up again, carrying the distant scent of baked clay and morning preparations. Somewhere, a rooster crows, way too early, as they tend to do. A few voices stir in the distance. The city is beginning to rouse. You decide to head back, but not before glancing one more time at the crumbling ruins behind you. They look like sand dunes now, ghosts of architecture, whispering, almost if you're willing to imagine it. Build, they seem to say, but don't cling. You walk slowly, your bare feet brushing against dry reeds. In the faint blue light before dawn, the bricks around you shift again, no longer just objects, but characters. Silent workers. Memory holders. One final image catches your eye. A child crouched by a puddle, pressing wet earth into a crude mold. Their mother watches from a doorway, smiling gently, her hand resting on the lintel. A familiar pose, unchanged across millennia. The child lifts the mold, peeks at the shape, and squeals with delight that a new brick is born. And the cycle continues. You head back toward the heart of the city, where the walls seem to exhale sleep and the alleys murmur like quiet rivers. Your path weaves between buildings whose bricks have seen more sunrises than any living soul in this city. And that's saying something, considering how long some of these priests live, mostly on dates, beer, and the fear of offending a god with improperly burned incense. But you pause again, not for a temple this time, not a ziggurat or kiln, but a humble home. Or rather, a row of them, each with a similar look, a small doorway, a sloped roof, and walls so uniform you'd think they'd been cloned by a committee of mud-loving bureaucrats. This, you realize, is Mesopotamian suburbia. Here, brick wasn't just a construction material. It was a way of life. These homes were standardized, built from identical molds, and spaced just so. It was efficient. It was repeatable. It was, well, a little boring. Which, honestly, makes it perfect for tonight. And here's a quirky twist. In many cases, the bricks used for homes weren't brand new. They were secondhand, sometimes third. People would dig up old structures, ruins, disused temples, even enemy buildings, and harvest the bricks like time-traveling recyclers. You could quite literally be living in the same wall your great-great-grandfather prayed in, or drank beer next to while loudly complaining about barley prices. Archaeologists call this phenomenon brick robbing, and it's more common than you might think. Entire cities vanished not because they were destroyed, but because someone needed their mud bricks elsewhere. Think of it as ancient urban renewal, except instead of bulldozers, it's just a bunch of sweaty guys with baskets and slightly guilty consciences. Historians still debate whether this recycling was born from practicality, spiritual ideas about continuity, or plain old laziness. Probably all three. After all, if a brick still holds, why waste it? You step into one of these homes, ducking under a low doorway. Inside, it's cool and dim, thanks to the thick earthen walls. The floor is packed clay, smooth from decades of footsteps. In one corner is a small hearth, outlined by heat-darkened bricks. Above it, a vent, more of a hole, really, channels out the smoke. Ingenious, in a minimalist way, your fingertips graze the walls. Every few inches, the texture shifts, a clue that these bricks weren't all made the same day, or even the same century. Some are smoother, others gritty with more straw. You can imagine the layers of time, pressed together like pages in a silent book. Here, in this stillness, the walls feel alive. You spot a shelf pressed into the brick. It holds little objects, a lump of clay shaped like a goat, a reed stylus, a chipped bowl with dried something or other still clinging to the rim, a child's toy, a priest's writing tool, a tired mother's unfinished dinner. Time has blurred the details, but the intimacy lingers. You lie down on the floor, right there in the middle of this ancient domestic square. The ceiling is low, the walls close. But instead of feeling cramped, it feels safe, like the bricks are holding you. And in that comfort, you notice something else, sounds. Not from outside, but from within the bricks themselves. Not real sounds. Of course, you're not having a historical hallucination, but imagined ones. Embedded memories, the scrape of sandals, the giggle of a child, the splash of a water jug tipping over. Someone humming a tune that doesn't exist anymore, but still lingers in the mortar. You close your eyes and let it all swirl around you. Then a louder sound cuts in. Footsteps. Not yours. A worker steps through the doorframe, a mudbrick craftsman from another time. He doesn't see you. You're just a shadow tucked in the wall. He moves to a corner, squats, and begins shaping a brick right there, inside the home. You watch his fingers, fast and practiced, press straw and clay into a mold, smooth the top, and knock it free with a gentle tap. He lines it up beside others, his face calm, focused, sun-worn. It's the kind of task that doesn't need thinking anymore, just rhythm, breath, and patience. And then he pauses, wipes his brow, looks around the room. You wonder if he's thinking about where those bricks will go, whether they'll become a wall or a bed platform, or maybe even part of the ziggurat, way off in the distance. Or maybe he's not thinking at all. Maybe he's just enjoying the cool of the home, the peace between tasks. You blink. He's gone. The house is still. You sit up slowly and walk back to the doorway. Outside, the sky is softening into pale blue. Dawn is blooming, quiet and unhurried. The bricks of the homes around you glow faintly with dew, like they've just woken from their own dreams. You take one last look at this neighborhood. Its sameness, its smallness, its quiet beauty, and you realize this was the point all along. The ziggurats were impressive, the kills dramatic, but it was here, in these unremarkable little rectangles of space, that Mesopotamian life truly happened. These bricks held marriages, births, gossip, silence, grief, and joy. Over and over again, they weren't just walls. They were witnesses, and you've been lucky enough to sit with them. You find yourself standing once again at the edge of the riverbank, where this whole muddy saga began. The Euphrates flows beside you, sluggish and syrupy in the morning light, as if it, too, needs a few more moments to wake up. The air smells of damp silt and yesterday's sun, and reeds sway lazily, brushing against one another like drowsy gossipers trading secrets about the city. You glance down. Mud. Glorious, squishy, omnipresent mud. The same gray-brown slop that started everything. And now, after trudging through temples, brickworks, classrooms, sewers, suburbs, and even the occasional haunted rooftop, you're back where the magic, or maybe the monotony, begins. This, after all, was the source of it all. It wasn't divine revelation or some grand cosmic scheme. It was dirt plus water, plus just enough desperation to make it stick. Literally, ancient Mesopotamians didn't choose mud bricks because they were the most glamorous option. They chose them because, well, they were there. Free, abundant, and utterly inescapable. Still, there's something oddly poetic about it. Mud was their building block of homes, of cities, of civilization itself. Every palatial wall and lowly bench had the same origin story. Someone stuck their hands into the squelch and started shaping, and they kept shaping. Day after day, year after year, for centuries, the city around you. You are, or maybe Eridu, or perhaps just another anonymous pile of ruins baked into the modern soil. Rises because someone kept believing a bit of mud and straw could hold back the chaos of the world. That's weirdly comforting. You kneel beside the river and let your fingers sink into the sludge. It's cooler than you expected, soft as cake batter, and impossibly ancient. Somewhere in this mud are molecules that once passed through the lungs of a Sumerian priest, or soaked into a royal sandal, or dried onto a merchant's cart. It's not just earth, it's recycled history. You scoop some into your hands and press it into a rough brick shape, just to feel it. It doesn't look like much. But then, neither did the first brick that built Uruk's walls. And yet, those bricks became empires. You imagine a young apprentice, long ago, sitting by this very riverbank, tasked with making 50 bricks before dusk. No grand dreams, no royal commissions, just a routine chore on a hot day. Maybe he sang while working, or maybe he grumbled. Maybe he carved a secret symbol into one of the bricks and smiled at the thought that it would be hidden inside a wall for all eternity, undetected and untouched. Historians still argue whether brick-making in Mesopotamia carried symbolic weight, or whether it was just the ancient equivalent of filling out spreadsheets, essential, mind-numbing, and best done before lunch. Either way, it stuck. You walk back from the river with muddy hands, trailing footprints through dust. Each step feels like you're pressing into the past. But this time, you're not walking through ruins or temples. You're walking through legacy. The invisible thread between utility and permanence. You pass a few leftover bricks, abandoned near a half-finished wall. Their edges are chipped, the straw poking out in wiry tufts. You notice one has a faint impression, like someone once leaned their elbow there, perhaps thinking about lunch or watching a goat do something mildly amusing. And now, centuries later, their absent-minded lean has left a permanent mark. That's the thing with mud bricks. They record without judgment, no need for grand declarations or royal decrees. Just everyday life, stamped softly into clay. You look up and see a row of older bricks above you. Fired, not sun-dried. They shimmer with a faint reddish tint, still holding on to the fire that once hardened them. These bricks are survivors. They've been rained on, baked, chipped, and perhaps even cursed a few times. But they're still here, just above them, graffiti. Yes, ancient graffiti. Carved letters, crude little drawings, a bird, a suspiciously smug-looking sheep, maybe even a phallus, because some things never change. People marked bricks not just with ownership seals, but with jokes, prayers, and occasionally, complaints. One favorite? A brick that reads something like, "May this house stand longer than my mother-in-law's opinions." Immortal sass, courtesy of a Mesopotamian bricklayer. You chuckle. Quietly. You don't want to wake the city. You continue onward, wandering back toward the center. You pass courtyards where elders once played board games on baked mud tiles. You stroll past columns held up by bricks that had no business standing this long. And yet, here they are. You cross paths with a wall that seems to have folded in on itself, like it gave up mid-century. Some bricks lie in sad, dusty heaps. But even now, even collapsed, they serve a purpose. Lizards dart between them. Grasses grow up their cracks. The city reclaims what it loses and builds again. A voice seems to whisper through the silence. Build small, but build often. You smile, and as the city yawns into daylight, you realize this. Ancient Mesopotamians didn't need cathedrals or castles to feel powerful. Their strength was in repetition, in routine, in the ordinary miracle of brick upon brick. The glory wasn't in the monument, it was in the making, and somewhere, someone's great-great-grandmother is still sitting on one. You pause now in the hush of the morning, standing at the center of what was once a bustling, sun-baked intersection, a crossroads that had no name, no statues, no triumphal arches. Just bricks. Bricks beneath your feet. Bricks forming the shop walls beside you. Bricks overhead in the low, sagging lintels. You're surrounded by the very dust of intention. Here, in this quiet square, you breathe it in one last time. The strange scent of history, soaked into every crevice. You tilt your head and swear you can hear it. The faint scratch of a reed stylus carving a wet slab. A wheel creaking beneath a cart. A distant voice haggling over onions or fish or something that has long since gone extinct. But the bricks, still here, still patient. See, this is where the myth ends, not with glory or collapse, but with quiet persistence. You finally understand why the ancient Mesopotamians loved their mud bricks. It wasn't passion, not in the fiery, dramatic sense. It was something softer, something slower. Mud bricks weren't just architecture, they were habit, continuity. A warm cup of barley beer on a breezy roof. A grandmother's kitchen scent baked into the walls. A child's footprint preserved in drying clay. Little things, sleepy things. And maybe, just maybe, loving your bricks meant loving your life. Messy, cracked, and uneven, but still worth stacking, one imperfect layer at a time. You sit on one now, letting the stillness settle in your shoulders. The breeze brings a hint of something ancient and floral, maybe from a ghost garden long since returned to dust. You close your eyes. Even the gods, in their glorious ziggurats, were worshipped atop bricks no different than the ones used to fix a leaky toilet stall in a tavern. Everything and everyone rested on the same foundation. No one was above the mud. Historians still debate whether this culture of humble permanence shaped Mesopotamia's politics, or whether it was just the side effect of endless river silt and a shortage of timber. But maybe it doesn't matter, because in the end, Mesopotamians weren't chasing eternity. They were chasing continuity. They built, not to last forever, but to last long enough. Long enough for the next meal, the next festival, the next season's harvest. Long enough to raise a child, to share a story, to complain about the price of sheep. And in that rhythm of remudding and rebuilding, they found their version of peace. You run your fingers over the edge of a nearby brick, warm now from the rising sun. The straw inside crunches faintly. That same combination, clay, water, straw, hasn't changed in millennia. You could make one right now and no one would know the difference. No patents, no instruction manuals, just intuition. The absurd simplicity of it makes you grin. It's like the universe saying, "Look, I gave you mud. That's enough." And it was. Maybe it still is. Your mind drifts to modern cities, steel skeletons and concrete lungs, blinking traffic lights, paperless everything. Even now, we're still stacking things, still building, still hoping that what we create will hold up long enough for someone to notice. But ancient Mesopotamians, they didn't ask for notice. They just made bricks, baked them, stacked them, and lived inside them. Over and over again, they didn't call it greatness. They called it Tuesday.so now. As the last of the story softens around you, you're left with one final image. Not a ziggurat or a tablet or some grand council chamber, just a wall. Uneven, slightly leaning, maybe patched with some fresher bricks. And behind that wall, laughter, or cooking, or silence. You smile again, slower this time, because you finally get it. The mud bricks weren't meant to impress. They were meant to endure. And now, as the sun rises gently over the forgotten rooftops of a long-crumbled city, you begin to drift. Your breath slows. The mud beneath your feet fades into soft cotton sheets. The bricks blur into pillows of memory that you've traveled far tonight. Not in miles, but in time. Through dusty courtyards and breezy rooftops. Through laughter that never made it into history books. And bricks that never asked for attention. The hands that built those walls are long gone, but their quiet rhythm remains, like a lullaby in clay. Let that rhythm carry you now. Each breath, a brick. Each exhale, the straw that binds it. You don't need to build anything tonight. Not thoughts, not plans, not worries. Just rest. Let the story soften. Let the details dissolve. The city, still and silent, wraps around you that you're not alone here. You are surrounded by centuries of sleep, no alarms, no demands. Just the long exhale of a world that was built to endure, not to shout. And somewhere in that silence, maybe a reed flute plays a tune just for you. Something slow, something round and old, something with more earth than melody. Let it drift you down. You're home now, in the walls of story, and they're warm, and they hold, and they're made of mud.